In 2330, the captain of the exploration ship Frontier arrived in Neon. Over the following days, the captain would meet the people of the Pleasure City built atop an active fishing platform and change their lives in ways big and small. I'm the Irresolute Cartographer, and these are some of the stories of the people of Neon. Before starting this, I want to note that this video is fairly different from most of my lore videos. Typically, I base videos on information gleaned from notes, digital recordings, audio recordings, and the words of NPCs. In this case, almost all the material is accumulated from NPC dialogue with the player character. With this being the case, I felt it would be best to embed the lore within a narrative in which the player character is meeting these characters, and tell the story of the world from that perspective. With this being the case, we will follow a potential version of the story of the player character, whom I refer to as the Captain of the Frontier. This narrative will include meeting all publicly accessible NPCs, visiting every publicly accessible location, and completing all side missions in Neon. Note that for the most part, the missions I'll cover here can be performed in any order you choose, and have alternate endings. I will detail those with order requirements and alternate endings in the notes. That said, let's get started. As humanity evacuated a failing Earth in the mid-22nd century, the original destination for the refugees was Jemison, the third planet of the Alpha Centauri system. At the time, all of humanity lived under a single government, the United Colonies. Originally formed in 2159 to coordinate the Exodus, the UC quickly became the central authority in the new system. But the recently rescued population soon began chafing under the weight of its bureaucracy. In an attempt to appease these dissidents, the UC issued the Centaurus Proclamation in 2161, granting any person the right to settle new worlds and establish independent political bodies. Thus began the diaspora, and with it humanity's expansion across the stars. To the galactic east, explorers discovered a system with an ocean world. They named the star Voli, the planet Voli Alpha, and built a floating platform above the planet-wide sea to harvest its marine life. The owner of this platform, the Xenofresh Corporation, soon discovered an unexpected property in one of the native fish species. The fish oil produced by the chasm bass had psychoactive effects on human physiology. When refined, this oil became a highly addictive and potent hallucinogenic drug known as Aurora. Practically overnight, Xenofresh's fishing platform was transformed into Neon, a pleasure city built atop an active fishing operation. While the company continues to harvest seafood to this day, Aurora became its chief product, fueling a booming economy and rapid urban growth. When Solomon Coe, the explorer of the Cheyenne system and the founder of Aquila City, was looking to form a new political force in the late 2180s, he invited Voli to join. In 2189, Neon became one of the two founding cities of the Freestar Collective. As of 2330, Neon remains primarily owned by Xenofresh, but is also host to many corporations as well as small businesses that call the bustling settlement home. This was the state of things when the Captain of the Frontier arrived. Though there are many reasons that they may have come to Neon, for the purposes of this video, they were simply here to explore the pleasure city of the settled systems and take in all that it had to offer. Upon landing, the captain stepped out into a soft rain falling across the city. They passed beneath the glowing welcome sign and made their way along the elevated walkway stretching over the ocean towards the base of the platform. Above them, the city loomed. Much of the structure was shrouded under a golden mesh framework, but two towers pierced through, reaching for the clouds above. At the underside of the platform, the captain encountered the city's primary security checkpoint, just in time to witness a man being arrested for attempting to leave Neon with Aurora in his possession. As he was hauled off by security, the captain figured it might be wise to get a handle on the city's rules to avoid a similar fate. Fortunately, while two guards left to escort the accused smuggler to jail, one remained behind. The captain approached and struck up a conversation. Her name was Sophie Jex, and she explained the city's simple but strict rules regarding Aurora. First off, it is illegal to transport Aurora anywhere else in the settled systems. It was only legal to own and consume within Neon. Attempting to transport Aurora off-world, accidentally or not, would result in arrest. She noted that this was precisely what had happened to the man they'd just seen arrested and gave his name, Nishar. The second rule was that though Aurora could be consumed anywhere in Neon, it could only be legally purchased at the Astral Lounge, a club owned by Xenofresh located in the trade tower on the western end of the platform. Anyone else selling it was breaking the law. When the captain thanked her but commented that her post seemed undesirable, she surprised them, explaining that she was thrilled with her assignment. It was far more stable than most jobs available on the platform. With that, the captain rode the elevator up into the core of Neon and emerged into an assault on the senses. While the captain had noted a mild fishy odor in the damp warmth of the world outside, entering the core of the platform was a smack to the face by aroma, light, and sound. The humid air, dense enough to form a light fog, carried a pungent mix of rust, oil, sweat, and body odor. Overpowering it all was a persistent stench of brine and fish, both fresh and rotting. The captain could practically feel the smells of the city seeping into their skin. Neon signs blazed in every direction, and their ears were bombarded by an endless cascade of advertisements and the roar of the crowd pressing past. After a moment spent adjusting to the overwhelming environment, the captain pulled their focus back. The arrest of Nishar had left them curious. Had he tried to smuggle Aurora off-world? More surprising was the way he had openly attempted to bribe the guards, apparently something he'd gotten away with in the past, judging by how they phrased it. The captain decided to follow up. Spotting a nearby outpost belonging to the Freestar Rangers, the overarching law enforcement body for the Freestar Collective, the captain figured it would be a good place to start looking for Nishar. They started off down the core and noted a sign that read Mining League to their left. The captain laughed at what they assumed was some sort of joke, a mining company set up on an ocean world, and moved on to the ranger's office. Inside, they found a single ranger standing behind the front desk. The captain approached and introduced himself. The ranger's name was Jalen Price. It turns out that Ranger Price was a native of Neon, the son of a Ryujin executive. Price and the captain spoke about Neon and the nature of law enforcement. While the Rangers maintained a presence in the city, Price explained that they rarely intervened in local affairs unless things spiraled out of control or threatened the broader Freestar Collective. Instead, day-to-day policing was handled by Neon Security, the organization Sophie Jex worked for. Having spent so much time in United Colonies territory, the captain was struck by how relaxed the Freestar approach to law enforcement seemed. Price admitted that aside from Aurora and truly dangerous contraband, most smuggling was simply overlooked. With a new destination in mind, Neon Security, the captain thanked Ranger Price and stepped back out into the streets. Heading west, the captain found the Volai Hotel and stopped in. They figured that if they were going to get the full Neon experience, they would have to take a room in the city rather than sleep aboard the Frontier. Inside the lobby, they noticed a nervous-looking man sitting off to the side, but chose to ignore him for the moment. Instead, they approached the front desk where the hotel's owner, Minerva Clement, was standing. The captain had actually met Minerva once before, during a previous visit from Martian Cydonia. At the time, they helped to mediate a dispute involving Rivka Avaja and her overbearing father, Natan, who regularly took a room at the Volai Hotel around that time of year. The captain had managed to broker a truce of sorts between them, leaving the door open for a possible reconciliation. Though that visit technically marked the captain's first time to Neon, they hadn't stayed long, just enough to handle the meeting with Natan Avaja. Thus, they considered this to be their first true visit to Neon. While renting a room, the captain and Minerva struck up a conversation. She mentioned that despite frequent harassment of her guests by Neon Security, she had managed to keep her establishment running with very little interference from Benjamin Bayou himself. This was the first time the captain heard the name of a man they would come to fear and loathe over the ensuing days. Administrator Benjamin Bayou, a member of the Freestar Collective Council of Governors, the man in political leadership of the platform. The captain would soon discover just how deeply into Neon Bayou's tentacles reached. When the captain asked Minerva how she had managed to keep the administrator out of her affairs, she told him that maybe if they stayed in the hotel for a few nights, she would tell them. For now, it would have to remain a secret. Assuming it was just a clever sales pitch, but planning to stay anyway, the captain took a room. Riding the elevator up, they found it well appointed. A large bed, private bathroom, and even a small kitchen. On their way back down, the captain saw the nervous man still seated in the lobby. Curious, the captain approached. His name was Miguel Rivas, and this was his bachelor party. As it turned out, anxiety was his default state, and he admitted to having trouble making friends. He'd come to Neon hoping for a wild experience at the suggestion of his fiancée, but was struggling to break out of his shell. Trying Aurora was well outside of his comfort zone, but he was considering one of the platform's signature drinks instead. Though unfamiliar with either blend or velocity, the captain suggested blend. The captain left him to his mental warm-up and stepped back out into the core. A short walk farther down the core brought the captain to the headquarters of Neon Security. The building was simple and purpose-built. While the guards slept, ate, and trained in the room upstairs, the ground floor housed a monitoring station and a jail. It was in that jail where the captain found Nishar Osmani. To their surprise, Nishar recognized the captain from the scene of his arrest and immediately pleaded for help. He explained his predicament. His incarceration had left him unable to complete a critical task, delivering a package intended for Yannick Legrand, the owner of Legrand's Liquors. The package, Nishar admitted, wasn't exactly legal, but he was desperate to deliver it to prove his loyalty. Though he never said it outright, it was clear that Yannick wasn't the sort of man you wanted to disappoint. Nishar feared not just for his livelihood, but possibly for his life. Though the captain wasn't typically inclined to criminal work, they decided, perhaps taking a page out of Miguel Rivas' book, to step into Neon's seedier side. Not only would it be an interesting experience, it might well save Nishar's life. They agreed to retrieve the package and deliver it to Yannick Legrand. With that, the captain stepped back out into the core. This time, they weren't headed for another spot in the steamy interior, they were headed out to the edge of the platform. This was their first trip to a district known as Ebbside, where they would find the Sleep Crate office. While Neon's core was the usual haunt of tourists, Ebbside was decidedly not. Here, the captain found the offices of Sleep Crate, the primary housing option for the near-destitute. Behind the counter sat Isna Sundara Araman, an underemployed art history graduate. She generally disliked her work, but her least favorite task was evicting impoverished families too poor to afford even a converted shipping container. When the captain stopped by her stall, it turned out to be the high point of her day. A welcome distraction from the usual grind of deprivation and drunks staggering in from the core. Using an access code provided by Nishar, Isna unlocked his sleep crate. She also made the captain an offer. One of her tenants was being evicted for non-payment, and she was willing to let the captain claim whatever was inside the crate sight unseen for 1,000 credits. Intrigued, the captain agreed. Isna unlocked the unit, revealing a coffee mug and 2 rolls of toilet paper. Not exactly worth the asking price. Regardless, the captain continued around the corner and retrieved Nishar's package. Before heading back into the core to deliver it to Yannick Legrand, the captain stopped to chat with Isna once more. When she explained that the sleep crates could be rented nightly or weekly like a hotel, the captain asked about the rates, only to discover that they matched the Volai hotel's prices exactly. She also mentioned that she had a crate for sale, and on a whim, the captain bought it for 6,500 credits. It was located on the opposite side of the platform, so they made a note to check it out later. For now, they turned back towards the core. It was around this point that the captain realized that Neon's core was actually divided into 2 distinct areas. They were currently in Bayou Plaza, the western end of the core, named for Benjamin Bayou and located closest to the trade tower. Their destination, Legrand's Liquors, lay on the eastern side of the core near Ryujin Tower. So far, the captain had only visited one location in Akuchi Market, the ranger station. Now it was time to visit someone operating on the other side of the law. The captain entered Legrand's Liquors and was surprised to see Miguel Rivas at the counter chatting with Yannick Legrand. It seemed that the anxious bachelor was finally making good on his plan to walk on the wild side, though it wasn't off to the best start. Miguel was complaining about the taste of blend. The shopkeeper, visibly annoyed, defended his concoction of liquors, sweeteners, and a secret ingredient as something that seemed universally loved, at least based on the sales. Unable to finish, as Miguel exited, he handed the captain his can of blend. Regardless, the captain had a job to do. When they revealed that they had Nishar's package, Yannick initially assumed they were working for Neon Security. However, once the captain handed over the expected parcel, his suspicion faded. He accepted the package, insulted Nishar, and paid the captain for their trouble. When the captain asked him if Nishar would be safe, Yannick brushed the concern aside, claiming that he would be rewarded for his loyalty. He had something else on his mind, offering the captain a role in his organization. It was then that Yannick revealed the secret ingredient in blend, Aurora. This entrepreneur was mixing a restricted substance into his signature drink, selling Aurora illegally. There was a reason he didn't sell blend off-world, and it wasn't just exclusivity. If the Freestar Rangers caught you with Aurora on your ship, you'd be locked up for a long time. Worse still, if Benjamin Bayou caught you selling in his city, the consequences would be far more severe. To the captain, Bayou was beginning to resemble a dangerously corrupt and potentially violent figure. But from Yannick's perspective, he was fulfilling a public need. The Astral Lounge was for the rich. Blend gave the working class access to the same escape. And if that meant breaking a few laws while raking in credits, so be it. Yannick wanted the captain to join his enterprise, but first there was a loose end. Felix Sadler. Though he had called all of his employees bottom feeders, Yannick claimed Felix made Nishar look like a genius. If the blend operation was going to grow, Felix needed to go, to quote Yannick, take a vacation, permanent off-world, among other more lethal suggestions. Felix, he said, was holed up in a warehouse in Ebbside. He wanted the captain to deal with him. Once again, the captain found themselves facing a morally gray and potentially illegal opportunity. And once again, they took the job. Just as they had tried to save Nishar's life, they reasoned that taking the assignment might be the best way to prevent an actual hit. If they refused, someone with fewer scruples might ensure Felix never left the platform. With that, the captain left the shop and returned to Akuchi Market. Crossing the market, the captain emerged on the northeast side of Ebbside, where they were stopped by a man named Digger Zemin. Digger warned that tourists like them should stay away. Ebbside was dangerous thanks to its violent gangs. The captain was, of course, already aware that illegal activity was rampant on the platform. They were participating in some themselves, but they hadn't yet encountered any gangs directly. When they asked for more information, Digger explained that 2 gangs battled for control of Ebbside, the Ebbside Strikers and the Disciples. The Strikers were in decline, which wasn't good news. The Disciples were ascendant and far more dangerous. While the strikers might rob you and send you on your way, the disciples were just as likely to kill you after taking your credits. After sharing this warning, Digger revealed his true motive. He asked for a donation. The captain, grateful for the information, and with credits to spare, handed him 1,000 credits before moving on. They'd barely taken a few steps before they saw Madame Sauvage's place, or rather heard it. The deep, pounding bass line of the club echoed through the corridor. Digger had mentioned it was the hangout of the Ebbside Strikers, and the captain was curious to see what it was like inside. Feeling the beat pulsing through them, they stepped through the doors. The very first thing they saw was an illegal Aurora sale. While they knew everyone else was doing it wouldn't hold up in court, seeing others openly flouting the law made them feel a little less isolated in their own choices. The captain headed for the bar, interested in sampling more of Neon's signature drinks. There they met Sophie Grace, a mercenary for hire with a talent in stealth combat. Though the captain didn't need her services at the moment, they made a mental note of her skills for the future. Beside the bar stood the club's eponymous owner, Madame Sauvage. She welcomed the captain warmly, but made it clear that her club was an island of order in semi-lawless Ebbside. She enforced her own rules, and anyone who broke them was out. The captain agreed to play by her terms and asked what she had on offer. Madame Sauvage introduced her signature drink, Velocity. Velocity came in 6 glowing colors. Though not a Neon native, she had grown up near the ocean on her homeworld and had always been fascinated by bioluminescent plankton. Inspired by those glowing sea creatures, she had created Velocity using bioengineered plankton, giving each drink its characteristic glow. The captain bought a bottle of red Velocity and was about to speak to the woman beside Madame Sauvage when they heard a familiar voice from above. Looking up, they saw Miguel Rivas again. The captain headed upstairs and found Miguel drinking with an unknown man in a flamboyant gold outfit. Miguel, clearly drunk, was finally starting to relax. He rambled about wanting to try every color of Velocity and asked the captain for a bottle of red. The captain handed over the one they just purchased. Miguel explained that he wasn't drinking a full bottle of each, just a few sips, and given his teetotaling past, that had been enough to get him thoroughly intoxicated. He was feeling so confident, in fact, that he now planned to try Aurora at the Astral Lounge, an idea encouraged by his new drinking companion. Curious, the captain spoke with a man. His name was Diosdado Cocoa, a fashion designer who had crafted this striking outfit he was wearing. He'd noticed how nervous Miguel was earlier, and made it his personal mission to help him loosen up. Though the captain was intrigued to see where this strange relationship might lead, they had work to do, and so they slipped out of Madame Sauvage's. It was a short walk to the warehouse, where Yannick had told the captain they'd find his soon-to-be former associate, Felix Sadler. Upon entering, the captain was glad they had handed off the red Velocity to Miguel. Taking on the hostile gang members between them and Felix would have been much harder while intoxicated. After a brief gunfight, the captain pushed forward and found Felix waiting upstairs. He was thrilled to see them. Felix thanked the captain profusely and praised Yannick for rescuing him from the Sielka Syndicate, apparently yet another gang operating in Neon. But his mood shifted quickly when the captain revealed they weren't there to rescue him. They were there to fire him, or fire on him if he refused to relocate off-world. Furious but not suicidal, Felix decided to leave Neon immediately and headed for the spaceport. With that resolved, the captain returned to Legrand's Liquors, crossing Ebbside and Akuchi Market once more. Yannick was pleased. The final loose end had been tied up, and it was time to move on to the next phase of his plan. With both Nishar and Felix gone, Yannick needed a new Aurora procurement network to continue producing blend. Nishar had once secured Aurora through a contact inside the Xenofresh fishery, but he had never revealed that person's name. Now, Yannick needed the captain to find this contact and restore the supply. To do that, the captain would have to work a shift at the fishery. Yannick would provide them with a fake ID under the name Riley Chernyshevsky, crafted just for this task. By this point, the captain was rapidly running out of moral gray area to hide behind. But they had come to Neon for the full experience, and this might be their only chance to see the interior of the Xenofresh fishery, the beating heart of Neon's economy. They agreed to give it a shot, but not today. The day had already offered more than enough excitement. The fight inside Warehouse 1 had left them feeling underarmed, and if another gang encounter was on the horizon, they wanted to be better prepared. Taking the fake ID from Yannick, the captain stepped back out into Akuchi Market, ready to look for some more firepower. The captain didn't have to look far to solve their firepower problem. Just a couple doors down, they found Neon Tactical. As the captain approached the shop, they noticed a well-dressed young woman loitering near the entrance. Striking up a conversation, they learned her name, Carolina Gortat. She was unemployed and living with her parents, hoping to find a job, but admitted she wasn't qualified for much of anything. When the captain mentioned they'd heard an ad for job openings at Ryujin Industries, just a short walk to the east, she dismissed the idea. If Ryujin was advertising, she reasoned that meant too much competition. Resigned to let her handle her self-inflicted employment woes, the captain stepped inside Neon Tactical to make their purchase. There, they met Frank Rennick and his combat robot, Styx. Frank was a veteran of the Colony War, the devastating conflict that had torn the settled systems apart a couple of decades earlier. He had served in the Freestar Collective's infantry and lost an eye in a shuttle crash. He considered it a lucky break. Others on board hadn't survived. Styx, on the other hand, had once belonged to a man who owed Frank money. When the man got into a fight with an Aurora dealer and fell off the platform, Frank inherited his belongings, including the deactivated Styx. It took him a few months of scavenging and repair work, but Frank got the robot back in working order, and Styx now served as the shop's security system. Recently, however, Styx had been vandalized, covered in graffiti. When the captain asked about it, Frank explained that Styx had killed a member of the Disciples during a robbery attempt a few years back. Since then, in retaliation, he had faced constant harassment from the Disciples. This problem had reached a new low when one of the Disciples, a man known as Warlord, had tagged Styx as part of the gang's revenge. Frank was furious. Styx wasn't just a security bot, he was a friend. The captain offered to track down Warlord and demand compensation. Frank was grateful. With a new firearm in hand and another mission on the horizon, the captain left Neon Tactical. It had been a hell of a first day, but they weren't quite ready to turn in. A drink and a little downtime seemed in order. Though they could have picked up something from Yannick, the captain opted to find a proper bar. Madame Sauvage's place crossed their mind, but instead they headed for the Astral Lounge, a decision made to avoid any syndicate attention. It was an ironic choice, though the captain wouldn't understand just how ironic for a few more days. Upon reaching the trade tower, the captain noticed the statue of Benjamin Bayou, its plaque declaring it dedicated by the grateful citizens of Neon. Based on what they'd heard so far about Administrator Bayou, the captain had their doubts about this origin, but they set the thought aside and entered the club. Inside, the captain took in the scene. A packed dance floor, stage dancers, a bar pulsing with energy, and a DJ seemingly floating above it all. And, once again, Miguel Rivas. The captain found him dancing in place, high as a kite on Aurora, while Diosdado Cocoa lounged nearby. Miguel was euphoric, talking about how he might finally make up for all the years he'd spent paralyzed by anxiety. The captain did their best to talk him down, gently warning against making any long-term decisions while under the influence. But Miguel was barely listening, he was too far gone. They left the lounge without ordering a drink, stepping out into the humid air of Bayou Plaza. A short while later, they were back at their room in the Volai Hotel. After a quick shower, they collapsed into the bed and slept soundly through the night. The next morning, the captain woke up and crossed Bayou Plaza to grab a coffee at Terabrew. Reinvigorated, they figured it was time to start working under the alias Riley Chernyshevsky. As they passed the fully automated Galbank branch, they remembered Miguel's Aurora-fueled boasts about visiting Enhance. Concerned, the captain decided it might be worth checking in, just to make sure he hadn't gone through with it. They turned around and headed across the plaza and stepped inside Enhance. What they found was unexpected. Standing at the counter, chatting with the cosmetician, was a man barely recognizable as Miguel Rivas. His hair had been lengthened, his eyebrows had been made thinner. His scruffy beard had become a goatee. He had a new mole beneath his left eye. His irises were gold, his ears were pierced with golden studs, and he was wearing Diosdado's shimmering gold outfit. It was a lot to take in. Miguel, however, was immensely proud of his new look. The captain, trying not to hurt his feelings, said nothing about how bizarre it all was. Beaming with confidence, Miguel announced he was heading back to the Volai Hotel, where his fiancée would soon be arriving to collect him. Once he'd gone, the captain struck up a brief conversation with the enhanced attendant, Paige Overton. Paige told his story about how she'd gotten this job through her girlfriend, Valentina Gurov, who worked at Xenofresh. Though they didn't know it yet, the captain would meet Valentina later that same day. Paige also shared an odd story, suggesting that her predecessor had mysteriously disappeared from Neon just before she took over the office. Still, nothing else about her seemed unusual. With that, the captain made their way back to Bayou Plaza, ready to apply for work at the Xenofresh fishery. Though the captain would have loved to check in with Miguel and his fiancée, they had work to do. Entering the trade tower, they rode the elevator up to Xenofresh Fisheries' corporate headquarters. At the front desk, they met Amanda Oxendine. When the captain asked if Xenofresh was hiring, Amanda confirmed they were, and noted that the company placed a premium on applicants with a background in chemistry. Fortunately, the captain had a basic knowledge of the subject, and felt confident in their ability to demonstrate it. Using a nearby application terminal, they submitted a questionnaire under the alias Riley Chernyshevsky, then returned to Amanda to let her know. She informed them that their application had already been accepted, and that Valentina Gurov down in the fishery was ready to conduct the interview. The captain was mildly stunned by the speed of the response, but before heading down, they decided to look around and get a feel for the corporate side of Xenofresh. The office was relatively small and overseen by an older woman named Libby Graff. When the captain entered her office, she was clearly displeased. She'd been expecting a delivery of croissants, and they were not that. When she made a vague threat about punishing Amanda for letting them in, the captain made a hasty exit. With their actual goal in mind, reaching the Xenofresh fishery and Neon's Underbelly, they took the elevator back down to the ground floor, stepped into Bayou Plaza, and made their way into southwestern Ebbside. Just as they were about to leave the plaza, they found a representative of the Trackers Alliance. The captain had previously met representatives of the Bounty Hunter Collective in Cydonia and New Atlantis who told stories of their greatest hunt. Hoping for another such retelling, they struck up a conversation. Unfortunately, this particular hunter didn't like to tell these stories, feeling that the job wasn't to be celebrated. A little let down, the captain headed out into Ebbside. There they found Euphorica, the lounge that Frank Rennick of Neon Tactical had said was the usual haunt of Warlord, the disciple who had tagged Styx. The captain decided to stop in and settle Frank's business on their way to work. Inside Euphorica, the captain found Warlord just a few feet from the entrance, lounging with another disciple. They struck up a conversation, and Warlord explained that what he'd done to Styx wasn't just revenge for a fallen gang member, it was, in his words, a work of art. The captain demanded restitution. Warlord resisted at first, but with some firm cajoling, they managed to convince him to hand over the credits. As they stepped back out into Ebbside, the captain reflected on Diggerzamin's warning. He'd been right. The disciples weren't just criminals, they were dangerously violent. Warlord had spoken of killing with casual ease. The captain made a mental note. When time allowed, they'd look into helping the Ebbside Strikers push back against the growing threat. They resumed their path to Xenofresh fisheries, but along the way realized they were passing the sleep crate they'd purchased the day before for 6,500 credits. Curious, they decided to check it out. Stepping inside, the captain quickly realized that privacy was not part of the package. The area outside was crowded with fishmongers, and they could literally make eye contact with passersby while using the crate's built-in toilet. Still, it was a tiny slice of Neon real estate, and it was theirs. After taking in the full scope of the space, they headed for the nearby elevator down to the Underbelly. Now closer to the water than they had been since arriving, the captain made their way across the catwalk suspended hundreds of feet above the ocean. Even here, the sea felt distant. They passed hanging fish and what appeared to be one of the boats that caught them before arriving at the Xenofresh fishery. As they entered, the captain noted the exhaust system above vented directly into Neon's core, likely a major contributor to the moisture and briny stench they'd encountered upon arrival. Realizing the stench was about to get worse, the captain stepped inside, ready to begin their shift as Riley Chernyshevsky. Inside, the captain found Valentina Gurov, the plant foreman, in the middle of a heated phone call with Libby Graff. Libby was demanding increased output to meet the expectations of Benjamin Bayou, while Valentina insisted that her updated budget be approved. What she received instead were vague threats and mounting pressure. It was clear that Libby hadn't even acknowledged her plea for additional support. Frustrated, Valentina ended the call and turned to greet the captain as Riley Chernyshevsky. She approved of their prior on-the-job training at Argos Extractors and their basic knowledge of chemistry. She handed them a hazmat suit with strict instructions to keep it on at all times while working. As she guided them down to the lab, Valentina laid out the rules. Their job was to produce Aurora substrate, a key precursor in the drug's manufacture. The company would provide all the necessary ingredients, use only what was needed, no more. Any extra would result in docked pay. Complete the compound within a minute. Any longer would also reduce pay. But if they used just the right amount and finished early, they'd get a performance bonus. The captain reviewed the recipe and began their shift, grabbing Kazanbas oil, benzene, stimulant, and hallucinogen, processing them through the lab equipment, and depositing the finished chemical again and again. By the end of the shift, they'd earned a solid bonus, but that wasn't the real goal. Break time was. Officially, it was a chance to rest. Unofficially, it was an opportunity to meet Nishar's contact inside Xenofresh. They found her. Though Robbie Henninger introduced herself as Robbie, it seemed unlikely that this was her real name. Robbie explained that her role in the operation was placing Aurora dead drops in Ebbside for the captain to collect. She was glad to have the operation running again, though Nishar's disappearance had clearly cast a shadow over things. With a dead drop location in hand, the captain returned to the upper levels. Back in Akuchi Market, they stopped into Neon Tactical to deliver Warlord's credits. Frank Rennick was grateful. With that task complete, the captain continued down the street to Legrand's Liquors, and there they got the shock of their life. The shop was nearly empty. Just Yannick, 2 security officers, and Benjamin Bayou. At first, the guard nearest the door tried to shoo the captain away, but quickly realized they were the other half of the duo Benjamin Bayou was waiting for. Without further resistance, they ushered the captain inside. As they approached, Mr. Bayou turned his wrath on Yannick, castigating him for pushing Aurora in his city and for triggering a bloodbath in Ebbside. Then he turned to the captain, greeting them as the brains of the operation, and asked a simple but chilling question. Why should I let you live? The captain considered their answer carefully. It was immediately clear that Bayu commanded the security force. If he decided to kill them, there would be no investigation. They attempted a measured apology, but Bayu wasn't in the mood. He was angry, and more than that, he felt ripped off. Yannick, stripped of his usual swagger, tried to defend himself. He pitched Blend as Aurora for the masses. Then he looked to the captain for backup. The captain responded calmly. People had been lining up for Blend all day. It was a nearly untapped market, a product with a real potential. Bayu was impressed. Yannick, emboldened, slipped back into his usual habit of referring to himself in the third person, a choice that earned mockery from Bayu, but also a deal. Yannick and the captain were granted clearance to smuggle Aurora out of the fishery. In return, Bayu would receive 20% of the profits from every unit of Blend sold. With that, Bayu departed, leaving the captain with a very real feeling that they'd just survived, at the very least, an attempted execution. Afterward, the captain and Yannick conferred. It was clear they both felt the same. They had barely escaped with their lives. Yannick was frustrated with the loss of profits, but now, with Bayu's blessing, they had the freedom to operate. They had a clear path forward. The captain would continue working shifts at the fishery and return with smuggled Aurora. With the legal risk now resolved, it was a seriously profitable opportunity. But for now, the captain felt they needed to step away, to take a break from Blend and focus on something more respectable. They bade Yannick farewell for the time being and stepped back out into Akuchi Market. Wanting to clear their mind after what had just occurred, the captain crossed the core and stepped into a shop marked Newell's Goods. Inside, they found the proprietors, James and Rosa Newell, a husband and wife team, in the middle of a conversation. It seems that Benjamin Bayu had recently visited to personally thank them for their contributions to the city and expressed his hope for their continued support. Suddenly, the inscription on Bayu's statue in Bayu Plaza, dedicated by the grateful citizens of Neon, made a lot more sense. He was collecting taxes from the local businesses, using the funds to pay the security force he controlled, and to build up his own legend. Putting that aside for the moment, the captain turned their attention to Rosa, striking up a conversation. It was clear she hadn't been sleeping well. Between Bayu's constant demands for contributions, harassment from local gangs and drug users, and trouble with fellow merchants, Rosa was under serious stress. That fellow merchant was Dietrich Sieghart, the owner of Sieghart's Outfitters over in Bayu Plaza. He had apparently started paying off Neon security for proper protection. Her husband James was furious. Security was supposed to protect everyone equally. After all, that's what their so-called taxes were for. Dietrich's move had set a dangerous precedent. If he kept paying for protection, others might feel forced to do the same or be left to fend for themselves. Despite James's resentment, Rosa still had a soft spot for Dietrich. She and James had met while working at the Xenofresh fishery, on the food production side, not the drug lab where the captain had recently worked. Rosa had been a supervisor when James accidentally fell into a vat of fish guts up to his eyeballs. She pulled him out, dragged him to the showers, and helped clean him off. That was the moment he realized, while standing there completely naked, that she was the one helping him. They started dating, got married, and eventually opened their store. In those early years, Dietrich had supported them, offering advice and helping them get established. Rosa remembered those good times, and she wanted the feud to end. When the captain offered to mediate, she was thrilled. The captain next spoke with James, who greeted them with more grumbling about Sieghart's Outfitters. He was angry that Dietrich was paying off security chief Owen Drexler, and even angrier that he'd stopped attending the Merchants Alliance meetings. The captain offered to talk to Dietrich on his behalf. James appreciated the gesture, and the captain was soon on their way. Happy to be back on a more traditional mission, the captain made their way to Sieghart's Outfitters and found Dietrich sweeping his shop. Dietrich greeted them jovially, but lost much of that tone when he learned why they were there. He explained that he had stopped attending the meetings because he didn't want to deal with James's constant haranguing. He felt paying off security was a necessity to stay in business. The captain played on Dietrich's good nature, noting that Rosa understood why he was paying Drexler, but knew that he was a good man, and that good men stood up against corruption. His heartstrings deftly plucked, Dietrich agreed both to stop paying Drexler and to attend the Merchants Alliance meetings, even offering to bring snacks. When the captain returned to James and shared the outcome, he was stunned. All it took was a simple conversation. He admitted he'd been just as responsible for the bad blood as Dietrich and thanked the captain for helping them move forward. With the Merchants Alliance now unified and perhaps just a little bit more willing to resist Bayu's intimidation, the captain felt they'd done something to make up for the Blend deal earlier that day. Feeling ready to wind things down, they made their way to the Astral Lounge, committed to get that drink they'd missed the night before. When the captain arrived, they found the party in full swing. Aside from Miguel's absence, the scene looked much the same as it had the night before. They pushed their way through the crowd and made their way to the bar. Along the way, they met Mickey Caviar, apparently a former celebrity chef now trying to launch a second career. The captain briefly considered how nice it would be to have chef-prepared meals aboard the Frontier, but not when the ship was as small as theirs. They left Mickey behind and continued on. At the bar, they met the bartender, Boone Morgan. Boone asked what they wanted to order, and the captain told them they were looking to get a drink. He instead steered them towards Aurora, describing it as not a drug, but an exquisitely crafted, transcendent experience. The captain talked to him for a while, and when they brought up Benjamin Bayou, Boone called him a good man and a real humanitarian. He was a friend, and the man who had hired him for his role. The captain had known that Bayou was in command of Aurora distribution. This just showed how intricately involved he was in the operation. Feeling unsettled and looking to forget about Bayou, the captain returned to their plan to get a drink. When they considered Aurora instead, they hesitated. They'd seen what Aurora had done to Miguel, but they'd come to Neon for the full experience, and it was time. They took the dose. Almost immediately, the world seemed to slow down. It was surreal, and it felt good. The captain returned to their conversation with Boone, still in a daze, and at that moment of chemically enhanced euphoria, they made what may have been a questionable decision. They purchased a high-rise apartment, sight unseen, for 235,000 credits. Given their last real estate purchase, a sleep crate, it might seem like a reckless purchase, but between the Aurora and Boone's vivid descriptions of sweeping views, the morning sky, and the sunrise, it felt like the right call. With a key to the Sky Suite in hand, the captain wandered out onto the dance floor. The music pulsing through the lounge drew them upward, literally. Boone had told them that it was the work of the 19-year-old DJ known as Borealis, a name perfectly suited to someone spinning beats for Aurora users. Riding the elevator up and walking to her booth, the captain found Borealis dancing at her station. They struck up a conversation and quickly clarified that they weren't there for an autograph. She was tired of signing them. Borealis admitted that she wasn't in the best mood. Someone had stolen her data slate, which held all her new music. The captain, not wanting the beat to stop, offered to recover it. Just as they turned to leave, they noticed Benjamin Bayou himself standing in the VIP suite watching the crowd below. The sight of Bayou cut through the haze. Wanting to avoid his attention, the captain took the elevator down and slipped out of the lounge. As they walked towards the exit, they felt the key in their pocket and remembered the apartment they'd just bought. Slightly unnerved by their impulsive purchase, they took the elevator up, heading to their new home. The Sky Suite was small, about the same size as their room at the Volai Hotel. It featured a kitchen, a full bathroom, and a combined living room/bedroom space. It wasn't the grand penthouse they had envisioned, but they hadn't paid for space, they'd paid for location. Hoping the view would make up for it, the captain stepped out onto the balcony. From there, they looked out over Neon's industrial rooftops, the horizon shrouded by the city's iconic golden mesh framework. It was not the view they had imagined. Making a mental note to stop buying real estate sight unseen, especially for 250,000 credits, the captain rode the elevator back down to the trade tower lobby. They had an apartment now, but with no furniture, and they weren't going to sleep in a sleep crate when a well-furnished hotel room was waiting. Before long, they were once again back in Bayou Plaza, heading once more for the Volai Hotel. As the captain entered the Volai Hotel, something caught their eye. Miguel Rivas sitting alone off to the side. Knowing that his fiancée was supposed to have picked him up hours ago, and seeing the sadness in his expression, the captain walked over to check on him. Miguel explained what had happened. When Erica, his fiancée, saw his dramatic new look, she had been horrified. She called off the engagement and ran off to Madame Sauvage's place to get some space. Now, heartbroken, Miguel begged the captain to speak with her, to explain what had happened, and to try to bring her back. The captain, still reeling a bit from their own Aurora-induced foolishness, found themselves sympathetic, and so they hurried off to Madame Sauvage's place. They found Erica Foster at the bar, loudly venting about Miguel to anyone who would listen. When the captain gently brought up the subject, she explained her side. The transformation had been so sudden and extreme, she felt she didn't even know who Miguel was anymore. But when the captain pointed out that Miguel had made the change in response to her own challenge, calling him out for never doing anything spontaneous, she paused. She hadn't realized how seriously he had taken her words. After a moment's reflection, she admitted she might be partly to blame. Without another word, she stood up and rushed out of the club, heading back to the hotel. When the captain returned, they found Miguel and Erica reunited, their engagement back on track. With the bachelor party finally brought to a close and the couple reconciled, the captain headed upstairs, ready to sleep off the last of the Aurora haze and put an end to a very long second day in Neon. The next morning, the captain awakened unready for the lights and sounds of Neon. Had they really bought an apartment the night before? Still groggy, with a dry mouth and a dull headache pulsing behind their eyes, they stumbled across Bayou Plaza and grabbed a drink from Terra Brew. The coffee helped. Slowly, the fog began to lift. Though the night before was a blur, the captain remembered wanting to help the Ebbside Strikers take on the dangerous, violent disciples, and thus they headed off to Madame Sauvage's place. Inside, the captain met Andrea Sandoval, a member of the gang, and convinced her to let them meet the boss. Upstairs, the captain met Briggs. Though he was surprised someone wanted to clamber onto a sinking ship, he was grateful for the interest. He wanted to be sure they were right for the job. After questioning them about their background and motives, Briggs was satisfied, especially upon hearing that the captain wanted to take on the disciples. He offered them an audition, a stealth job. The task? Sneak into a disciple-controlled warehouse and retrieve a data slate without being seen. The captain agreed and headed back out into Ebbside. Though the warehouse in question was on the other side of Neon, a quick trip through Bayou Plaza brought the captain to their destination. Within Warehouse 2, the captain found 3 disciples, all busy with one task or another. Moving with practiced precision, the captain slipped down the stairs, located the data slate, and exfiltrated just as silently. The disciples never knew they were there. Briggs had hoped that this slate would have information on where the disciples were getting their high-powered weapons, and it did. It seems the disciples were purchasing their guns from Core Kinetics, a manufacturer of mag weapons, the Mag Pulse, Mag Shear, Mag Shot, Mag Sniper, and Mag Storm. Most weapons manufacturers weren't willing to openly sell to gangs, and this was no different. Core Kinetics was simply delivering their weapons to a conflict zone. With his slate in hand, the captain returned to Madame Sauvage's place and Briggs. Briggs was impressed by their performance. Not only had they completed the job undetected, they had returned with valuable intel. He officially welcomed the captain to the Ebbside Strikers and suggested they take some time to meet the rest of the gang before seeing Hatchet for the next mission. The captain soon learned the stories of this ragtag crew holding their ground in one of the rougher corners of Neon. They started with Andrea Sandoval. Andrea hadn't always been a gang member. She used to be a wealthy trader living a comfortable life until she lost everything to Aurora. In her own words, she had one epic crash at the Astral Lounge, woke up in the gutter, and had been crawling her way back ever since. Next, the captain met Vogel Fuchs, a group's second in command, a title he held with obvious pride. Vogel explained the nature of their conflict with the disciples. In the past, Ebbside had been informally split, strikers on one side, disciples on the other. But one day, the disciples decided they wanted it all. The fighting hadn't stopped since. What tipped the balance was firepower. The disciples weren't just equipped with Core Kinetics gear, they had fully automatic standard-issue weapons as well. The captain also took some time to talk with Briggs, the leader of the strikers. Briggs shared his past with Vogel. Both had been fired from their jobs and cast out into the streets. After months of failing to find honest work, they turned to crime just to survive. Over time, they took in more outcasts and misfits until they had a proper gang. But years of conflict with the disciples had worn them down. Now, only the diehards remained. Thanks to a long-standing friendship with Madame Sauvage, they were allowed to take shelter in her bar, one of the few safe places left. Lastly, the captain met Hatchet. Hatchet had grown up on the streets of Neon, surviving through sheer grit. Now, as part of the Strikers, she would fight to the death to protect her crew. Having heard the stories of their new allies and understanding the desperation and loyalty that bound them together, the captain turned to Hatchet with a simple question. What did Briggs have in mind for their next mission? It seems that Briggs wanted to announce the resurgence of the Ebbside Strikers to the disciples and the rest of Neon. Literally, he wanted billboards lit up across the city declaring that the Strikers were back. Of course, he wasn't about to pay for this advertising campaign, so Hatchet gave the captain a new assignment. Hack the city's electronic billboards and broadcast their message. They left Madame Sauvage's place and were soon back down in the Underbelly where they'd worked as a drug manufacturer the day before. When a security officer noticed them hacking the billboard, he stopped them, demanding a bribe. Faking that they were undercover, the captain managed to get the officer to back down. Rather than wait around to see if they would realize they'd been had, the captain headed back up into Ebbside. Now on the southern side of Ebbside, the captain passed a Chunk's restaurant and ascended the stairs to the upper utility section of the area. There, near a second control box, they found 3 disciples camped out around it. Whether they were posted to guard it or just loitering was unclear, but what was clear was that they weren't about to let the captain finish the job unharassed. Though they were tempted to kill them to make the job easier, following orders from Briggs, the captain simply sprinted in and out, leaving the disciples alive. With the second sign hacked, the captain descended back to Ebbside's lower deck and headed into Akuchi Market. Beside Legrand's Liquors, the captain made the last update to a billboard and then headed back for Madame Sauvage's place. Briggs was happy that the job was done and already had another mission for them. He believed the time had come for a showdown with the disciples. The strikers were going on the offensive, but they had 2 things to take care of beforehand. First, Briggs told the captain to check in with Vogel, who was coordinating a series of strikes across South Ebbside. The second thing was a request, not an order. If the strikers were going to stand a chance against the disciples' advanced weaponry, they'd need better protection. Briggs asked the captain to speak with James Newell, hoping that despite his past refusals, he might be convinced to sell them some armor. Before heading out to get the armor, the captain met with Vogel and learned the plan. They'd hit the disciples at 3 key locations, then regroup with the rest of the strikers outside Warehouse 3 for the decisive engagement. With this plan in mind, the captain departed for Newell's goods. As expected, James was reluctant to sell to a gang, but the captain made the case. Compared with the disciples, the strikers were the lesser evil. Though the captain could have bargained him down to 5,000 credits, they had felt they'd already leaned on him enough and paid him the full 8,000. With the armor en route to Madame Sauvage's place, the captain headed to South Ebbside. The first group of disciples was loitering around a cargo platform on the southeastern corner of the district. After a fierce gunfight, they lay dead while terrified civilians scattered. The second group was near the southern elevator to the Underbelly. The captain managed to drive them off without violence, using intimidation to scatter them. Finally, the captain approached the last group outside the Ebbside chunks and found Holt Hindley himself, leader of the disciples. Holt had been keeping tabs on the activities of the strikers. He knew that the captain's arrival had turned the tide for the gang. He offered them a deal. Kill the other strikers, all of them, and he would pay handsomely. Incensed at the suggestion that they would turn traitor, the captain gunned Hindley and his goons down as civilians ran screaming from the area. With their targets dead or driven off, the captain made their way to Warehouse 3, where the strikers, now clad in their new armor, awaited. Rather than risk a crossfire in the warehouse's tight confines, the captain asked them to watch their back as they entered alone. Inside, the captain fought a running gun battle, cutting down disciple after disciple until the warehouse was silent. Then, the strikers entered, held at gunpoint by Neon security. It was here that the captain finally met Owen Drexler, the head of the security force. They'd heard his name before in the conflict between Newell and Seahart, but Drexler hadn't been in the security office when they'd visited Nishar in jail. Drexler was fairly upset, but the captain wasn't in the mood to smooth things out with a corrupt cop in the moment, noting that someone had to do something about the disciples. And it was clear Neon Security wasn't up for the job. To their surprise, Drexler had an offer for the strikers. Put on the armor of Neon Security and fight the disciples with legal authority. Briggs was stunned. In one fell swoop, his outcasts were being allowed re-entry into the mainstream of society, so long as they used the opportunity to wage war on their most hated enemies and bring peace to their neighborhood. The strikers were united in their acceptance of the deal. And though the captain was losing the gang, they had accomplished what they'd set out to do in a single day. They bid their allies farewell and wished them luck in their new careers. With the streets safer than they had been just that morning, the captain headed back to the Astral lounge to celebrate their victory. As the captain approached the bar, they noticed a woman who seemed out of place, sharper than the usual lounge crowd. Striking up a conversation, they learned her name was Mania Adams, a fixer in town on business. She wasn't a fan of the music, but admitted it was perfect for counter-espionage. The beat masked whispers and made surveillance harder. The captain asked if she had any work at the moment, and she did. It was a simple job. Pick up a package stashed in a warehouse and sell it to the trade authority. No questions asked. Do those two things and she'd pay well. The captain agreed and left the lounge. They were fairly certain this was illegal, but truth be told, this job wasn't just about credits. All day, they'd been thinking about taking Aurora again. If they could resist the urge just once, it would prove they weren't hooked, that they were still in control. Back in Warehouse 3, the captain retrieved the package, a Sidestar pistol, and made their way to Akuchi Market. At the Trade Authority outpost, they met Coleman Lang, the local rep for the Settled Systems Free Trade Absolutists. He immediately lowballed them, claiming the gun had to be hot, but the captain, knowing their hardware, pushed back. It was a high-quality weapon, and Coleman eventually relented, paying a fair price. With the deal done, the captain returned to the Astral Lounge. Mania was satisfied. She paid what she'd promised, but made it clear their business was finished. She worked with outside contractors only once. The job complete, the captain wandered over to Boone Morgan and bought some Aurora. They had resisted once, that was enough proof. They could quit any time they wanted. That night, they partied in the lounge, wrapped in the warm haze of Neon's favorite high. Eventually, they stumbled back to the Volay Hotel, collapsed onto the bed, and let the glow carry them off to sleep. The captain awakened the next morning feeling even worse than they had the day before. Their head throbbed, their mouth was dry, and their limbs felt like they were moving through molasses. Once again, they made the arduous trek across the street for some Terrabrew coffee. As the hot, bitter coffee began to work its magic, they slipped into the darkened foyer of the Stroud Eklund showroom to wait for the fog to lift. When they felt steady enough to proceed, the captain headed deeper into the store and met Amiko Shinsato, the Stroud Eklund sales rep. She delivered a chipper, well-rehearsed pitch for the company's spacecraft. The captain nodded politely, but with no interest in purchasing a ship, especially after their recent impulsive real estate deal, they exited back into Bayou Plaza. Finally feeling ready to start the day, the captain decided to check out the neighboring shop, the Emporium. Inside, they found an eclectic collection of rare and historic items, including a worn notebook once belonging to Solomon Coe, containing his calculations for the first jump to the Cheyenne system. Suitably impressed, the captain struck up a conversation with the proprietor, Tevin Anastas. At first, Tevin was cold, even dismissive, but when the captain hinted they had money to spend, his demeanor shifted. He apologized for his rudeness and vented about the constant harassment he was facing from a member of the Seoka Syndicate, a thug who went by the name Headlock. Ready to help yet another beleaguered neon merchant, the captain offered to deal with the situation. Tevin admitted he didn't know Headlock's exact whereabouts, but suggested checking with Francesca Moore over at Frankie's Grab and Go. Members of the Syndicate tended to hang out around there. As the captain stepped out into the plaza and their mind went to Aurora, something dislodged in their memory. Borealis. They'd promised to recover her stolen slate. The fact that the memory had only now returned hours into the day after a full day of having forgotten it gave them pause. They were craving Aurora again at midday. Rather than confront the discomfort, they chose to see the memory as a sign of mental clarity. Reassured, or at least convincing themselves they were. The captain set off for Euphorica to follow the lead Borealis had provided. The captain took the short walk from Bayou Plaza to Euphorica and stepped inside. It was their first time back since convincing Warlord to pay for the damages to Styx 2 days earlier. At the time, they hadn't taken the opportunity to get to know the regulars or staff. Now seemed as good a time as any. At the bar, they met Danny Garcia, a robotics specialist and chemist specializing in one specific chem, looking to get out of Neon. The captain noted something slightly uncanny about Danny's appearance, but couldn't quite place it. Not in need of a robotics expert and able to make Aurora themselves, they moved on to speak to the bar's owner, Micah. She welcomed the captain to her establishment and recommended that they try Euphorica's signature cocktail, the Chimera, a drink known for its 3 visually distinct layers. She couldn't legally sell Aurora, but for 5,000 credits, she offered access to a private lounge where patrons could use their own supply in peace. The captain bought the pass, telling himself it was simply to gain access to more of Neon, not to use Aurora. That was the justification anyway. They then asked about Borealis' missing slate. Micah admitted she knew who had it, but information came at a price. Resigned, the captain paid up. Micah revealed that the thief was a fan named Stratos who hung out at Madame Sauvage's place when not in the Astral lounge. Before chasing down the lead, the captain went upstairs to check out the members-only lounge they'd just unlocked. The lounge was spacious, with its own bar and private bathroom. Behind the bar stood a young man named Q serving drinks. The captain struck up a conversation and found that, along with the drinks, Q also sold Aurora. When he claimed that, regardless of what they'd heard, he was able to legally sell them Aurora, the captain realized that Yannick's deal with Bayou to move Aurora outside the Astral Lounge was not the first of its kind. With Aurora on their mind again, the captain bought 5 doses, just to stretch over the next few days, they reasoned. One now, just to take the edge off. Feeling better, sharper, more alive, the captain asked Q about his past. Q was reluctant to share. When the captain brought up the topic with Micah downstairs, she suggested they ask him about his Gaguli. Intrigued, the captain headed upstairs and asked Q about it. He revealed that it was his name for a toy frog that Micah had given him when she'd pulled him off the streets. He had grown up in poverty, a condition that only worsened when his mother died. Working for Xenofresh, she had been killed in an industrial accident. His father had sunk into a deep depression, withdrawing from his son and spending his nights sitting on the edge of Neon, staring into the endless ocean. Q had brought him food every night, until the morning he found the food uneaten, while his father was gone. Alone, Q had been taken in by the disciples who had fed and raised him. Despite the sorrow in his story, Q expressed gratitude. There were always people worse off than he was, and at least he had people watching his back. However, that assistance came at a terrible cost, and the mental effects of what he had to do for the disciples was terrible. He was very happy that Micah had taken him in. She had even paid them off so he could leave the gang with no strings attached. He didn't know why she'd done so, only that he had reminded her of someone she had lost. Back downstairs, the captain asked Micah of whom it was that Q had reminded her. Micah shared that the first time she'd seen Q, she'd been reminded of her elder brother Junseng. The man had worked incredibly hard to reach the rank of commander in the Freestar Collective Armed Forces, only to die fighting in the Colony War 20 years ago. Taking in Q was her way of trying to hold on to his memory. Were it not for the Aurora, the captain would have been far more depressed by the stories they'd just heard. Numbed but functional, the captain left Euphorica, intending to follow the lead on Headlock. Frankie's Grab and Go was their next stop, but rather than pass through the core, they opted for fresh air and made their way to the Underbelly elevator. As the captain was walking through the Underbelly, they realized there was an entire side to the area they'd never explored before. The space turned out to be something of a food court, an unofficial gathering place for Xenofresh and Ginardine workers and staff. Among the 4 stalls nestled here was a Chunks Express, but the remaining 3 bore names and faces worth knowing. They began at Offworld Eats, the passion project of Cosmos Bacchus and his husband Lee Leonard. Cosmos crafted dishes from across the settled systems, some traditional, others entirely original, while Lee researched market trends and managed the books. The pair made a good team, but it was clear times were hard. Their unique and highly varied cuisine was extremely hard to produce on a shoestring budget, and they were facing rising costs for power, rent, and ingredients. The last of these was its own sad story. Though they had once collected the ingredients for the food themselves, they had been unable to bear the cost of maintaining their ship, and thus had been forced to sell it. This left them at the mercy of increasingly expensive contractors to source their ingredients. Leafyard insolvency was around the corner. Cosmos, ever hopeful, kept experimenting with new creations. The captain, sympathetic, offered to bring them rare ingredients during their travels. Cosmos was touched and gladly accepted the offer. Nearby, the captain found Glenn Markham running the Xenofresh seafood stall. Though he sold a few legitimate seafood dishes, the real centerpiece was trawl. Curious and wary, the captain asked what it was. Glenn claimed that it was an extruded polyblend paste made from premium organic seafood, and that it was the winner of the Volai Benthic Cuisine Award 9 years running. Hearing that this fish paste was award-winning, the captain assumed that said award was likely given by Xenofresh or some other Bayou-owned property. When the captain called trawl disgusting, Glenn politely asked them not to disparage company products on company property, and offered a corporate comment slate, which of course he didn't have. Pushed on his lack of enthusiasm, Glenn snapped a bit, complaining he was elbow-deep in trawl all day and that the smell of fish paste did not scrub out. However, he needed this job, and he didn't need the captain there rousing that part of him that hated the job. If he didn't work, he didn't get his company ration of Aurora. Asked what the truth about trawl was, Glenn explained trawl was everything Xenofresh couldn't turn into Aurora or fillets, ground up scraps, laced with alginate for vitamins, and then pressed into a paste. Seeing the man before them with similar cravings for Aurora, but stuck in a dead-end job covered in fish paste, the captain asked if some free Aurora might improve his mood. He didn't hesitate, of course it would. Without overthinking it, the captain handed him 3 doses, much to Glenn's appreciation. Leaving Glenn behind with their Aurora, the captain was about to head for the last stand when they noticed a woman sitting on the ground nearby. Though Wang Li didn't introduce herself as such, the captain spoke to her and learned that she was a proud professional panhandler. She called the captain chief and asked for a few credits. They passed her 25 and asked how she had become a professional. She revealed she'd been at it for years and had gotten quite good. She asked them for advice on how to be a better panhandler, and grasping without an idea, the captain suggested that she beg harder. Advice she took to heart. When the captain offered her more credits as they had no idea what she could get for 25, she turned them down, not wanting the captain to become penniless. The captain now headed over to the Quick Shop, seemingly a small convenience store nearby where Catherine Lusian was sweeping up. When the captain attempted to engage her in conversation, she told them that she couldn't talk to anyone just then. The captain pressed her on it a little, but learned no more than that something terrible had happened, and she left it at that. She thanked them for their concern and asked that they come back some other time. Respecting her wishes, the captain departed for the only structure in the Underbelly they had yet to explore, Ginardine Industries. Ginardine played a massive role in the history and daily life of all the people of Neon, even if that role was a supporting part. Ginardine supplied all the electric power used on the platform via their proprietary and unique conduction grid. Thanks to Volai Alpha being a warm ocean world, the atmosphere is filled with copious amounts of moisture, spawning nearly daily rainstorms and with them, thunderstorms. Ever since the discovery of electricity, it has been known that lightning is one of the most potent forms of the natural force. But thanks to that same potency, attempts to harness lightning as a power source have been fraught with failure and disaster. Beyond the difficulty in capturing the charge without overwhelming the system, no environment on Earth proved fruitful enough a source of lightning to provide power continuously. While Volai Alpha's stormy nature provided the raw material, the means to capture that power remained elusive until the development of the conduction grid. That golden mesh framework above the city of Neon, designed by Felicia Corbin, began construction in 2232 with the formation of Ginardine Industries. After 25 years of construction, the infrastructure was complete, and it supplies all of Neon's power to this day. The conduction grid works by diffusing the electrical energy of a lightning strike over the full breadth of the grid, before channeling that power into the underbelly of Neon, where it's turned into usable electrical power and stored in massive power cells from whence it flows out to the city. When the captain walked into the underbelly entrance of Ginardine, they found that only the lobby was open to the public. The rest of the plant closed off to protect trade secrets of the corporation. When the captain spoke to the receptionist behind the desk, she offered them the ability to file requests for assistance with their service at a nearby customer service terminal. When the captain asked how things were at Ginardine, she was initially hesitant to speak. She didn't want to lose her job. When the captain pressed her on it, she revealed that the company had a serious problem. Their head of R&D, Brayson Bayou. The brother of Neon's de facto ruler Benjamin Bayou, Brayson was generally viewed as an incompetent fool, a belief partially driven by Benjamin's own denigration of his brother. The receptionist the captain spoke to liked Brayson as an individual, saying he was a kind man, but laid the company's failure to develop any new products or to provide improvements to the conduction grid technology on his shoulders. It was clearly nepotism that had provided Brayson with his role, and it was a role to which he seemed woefully inadequate. Leaving the receptionist to her work, the captain headed for the customer service terminal. Though they were now themselves a client of Ginardine through their sleep crate and penthouse, they couldn't file a complaint even if they wanted to. The system was full. Along with this, strangely enough, they could read through the issues of their fellow customers. This included complaints about rate hikes from Cosmos Bacchus at Off-World Eats, and a demand for more power from Boone Morgan, the bartender at the Astral Lounge. While initially ignored, a threat to involve Benjamin Bayou saw his demand quickly rectified. Amazed that they were still discovering more of the tentacles of Benjamin Bayou, the captain headed back out into the Underbelly, returning to their route to Frankie's Grab and Go. Enough side trips. It was time to find Headlock and get him to stop harassing Tevin and Nastas in the Emporium. After riding the elevator back up, the captain made their way to Frankie's Grab and Go to finish what they'd started. Inside, they found a man named Shuchi Kanamatsu sitting at one of the tables. After a fruitless conversation in which Shuchi basically just repeated asking the captain to leave him alone, they did just that. Behind the counter, they found the proprietor, Francesca Moore, eyeing them with suspicion. She had her regulars, people she trusted. Newcomers, in her experience, usually meant trouble. Regardless, the captain managed to get her to open up a bit and learn some of her story. She explained that she'd opened this store with her husband Solomon, and they had high hopes for the business. That hope died the day Solomon was shot and killed during a robbery, leaving Francesca to run the shop alone. When the captain asked about Headlock, she initially denied knowing him. Once they convinced her to speak on the matter, she was curious as to why the captain was looking for him. It seems that even though she knew Headlock himself was a menace, that she had a special place in her heart for the Sayoka Syndicate, commenting that they weren't all bad. Persuaded to tell the captain Headlock's whereabouts, she asked what the captain had in mind for him. The captain told her that they were hoping to get him to stop harassing Tevin and Nastas. She scoffed that if there was anyone who needed harassment, it was Tevin, and the captain went on their way. With a new destination in mind, Warehouse 4, the captain set off across Ebbside's northern edge. Within Warehouse 4, the captain found Headlock accompanied by a pair of his fellow Sayoka Syndicate members. Though he was quick to threaten the captain, they retained their cool and talked to him about Tevin. After convincing the young man to leave Tevin alone, the captain dug into his past a bit. It seems that if the captain had come to Neon sooner, Headlock would probably be a member of Neon Security at this point. Though currently a member of the Syndicate, he'd once been an Ebbside Striker, abandoning the gang when it was in its period of decline. Headlock claimed that he was too good for the Strikers, and the Syndicate had recognized his greatness and offered him a position worthy of his skills. Regardless of whether this boasting was mere bravado of a man who had abandoned his friends in a time of need, or a truthful accounting of events, it didn't really matter. The captain had an agreement to leave the Emporium in peace, and thus they reciprocated, leaving Headlock to bask in his self-importance. Back out in Ebbside, the captain realized they were near Madame Sauvage's place, the purported haunt of Stratos, the stalker of Borealis, and the thief who had stolen her slate. The captain found Stratos sitting at a table, contemplating the music of his favorite artist. When the captain brought up the stolen data slate, Stratos was unapologetic. He claimed that he hadn't stolen anything. He insisted that Borealis had stated that her music belonged to her fans, and that as a fan, he hadn't done anything wrong. When confronted on the illegality of his actions, he even tossed out the classic finders keepers. Realizing they were dealing with a deluded narcissist, the captain dropped any pretense of logic. Instead, they offered a dose of Aurora in exchange for the slate. He agreed, concluding their conversation with the gall to demand that Borealis produce incredible music with the slate he was returning to her. Leaving him to his Aurora, and with cravings of their own, the captain headed back to Akuchi Market with two destinations in mind: the Emporium and the Astral Lounge. The captain crossed Akuchi Market and returned to Bayou Plaza, heading straight for Tevin's Emporium. They stayed just long enough to collect their payment and Tevin's thanks for resolving the Headlock situation before slipping back out into the core. A short walk brought them once again to the Astral Lounge. There they found Borealis and returned her stolen data slate. She was relieved, grateful to have it back, and not terribly surprised that it had been stolen by a fan. With the errand complete, the captain descended to the lounge proper and made their way to the bar. Sliding into a familiar seat, they ordered another dose of Aurora from Boone Morgan. That was the last thing they remembered clearly. The next thing they knew, they were lying fully clothed on their bed in the Volai Hotel, the door still ajar from the night before. No memory of getting there. No memory of the journey. Their Aurora habit had stopped being functional and had become dangerous. It was time to admit they needed help. The captain cleaned himself up and headed down to Bayou Plaza. Instead of self-medicating at Terra Brew, they headed east to the Reliant Medical Building. Inside, they found Dr. Joseph Manning, the physician for this particular branch of the Medical Treatment and Supply Company. Manning was no stranger to Aurora addiction. He'd seen too many cases to count, and had spent years warning against the drug's use. In the dim recesses of their memory from 4 days prior, the captain even remembered Miguel having mentioned Dr. Manning, warning him against its use. Unfortunately, Manning's outspoken campaign against Aurora hadn't made him many friends, especially not with its chief financial beneficiary, Benjamin Bayou. Using his influence over Neon security, Bayou had choked off Manning's supply lines, making it nearly impossible to treat his patients. Dr. Manning was becoming desperate for supplies, but was determined to hold the line. He needed unaffiliated captains to circumvent the blockade and bring him the supplies he needed. Freshly clean and sober, the captain agreed to bring supplies in on the frontier. Though they would have been willing to purchase the supplies themselves, Manning already had a source, a friendly doctor at the clinic. In 2194, the United Colonies had built the clinic and flown it into the unaffiliated Narian system. Fearful of being gobbled up by the UC, the people of Narian demanded the UC remove the clinic from their space. When the UC refused, Narian voted to join the fledgling Freestar Collective. When this came to pass in 2195, the FC demanded the UC remove the clinic from their territory and mobilized for war. The UC sent in a fleet, and in 2196, the Narian War began, resulting in a 20-year-long hit-and-run conflict. Ceded to the Freestar Collective in the 2216 Treaty of Narian, the clinic was now known as the best place to receive medical care in the entirety of the settled systems. In gratitude for Manning's help, and with a quiet determination to undermine Benjamin Bayou, the captain returned to the frontier and set a course for the clinic. Upon their arrival in orbit over Dapala, the captain docked with the clinic and made their way on board the famed star station. There they met Dr. Abby Edding, an old colleague of Dr. Manning's from a time when they both worked in the Aquila City Clinic. It turns out that not only was the captain not paying for these meds, neither were Drs. Manning or Edding. She was simply diverting them from the vast inventory of the clinic. Knowing that the supplies Dr. Edding was offering wouldn't last long against the constant, ravenous demand inflicted by Aurora, the captain pressed her for more, and managed to get her to double the size of the shipment. The captain thanked her for risking her position to save some lives, and they returned to the frontier. But before heading straight back to Neon, they made a brief detour to Gagarin. There, they picked up a variety of exotic, nutrient-rich ingredients for Cosmos Bacchus. With the medical shipment secured and supplies in hand, the captain set a course for Neon. Upon landing, the captain managed to return to Dr. Manning without security getting wise to their undercover supply run. Incredibly thankful for their efforts, the doctor paid the captain and went back to fighting Aurora. With that, the captain departed Reliant Medical and headed back down to the Underbelly. They had assumed that when Cosmos Bacchus had asked for exotic ingredients, he meant rare meats and nutrient-dense fluids from alien flora and fauna. As it turns out, he really meant exotic. Cosmos had no interest in the captain's stockpile of nutritious animal parts. He wanted rare solvents and high-grade stimulants. Fortunately, the captain happened to have a few such materials on hand and was still able to make the sale. Their trip to Gagarin, though, was clearly a waste of time. Still, Offworld Eats had more of the ingredients they needed, so the captain was happy to have helped.
Remembering Catherine Lusian, the nearby shopkeeper who had been too distraught to speak with the captain the day before, they headed over to see her at the quick shop.
This time, Catherine was far more open to conversation. She and her husband, Thomas, had run the quick shop for years, serving the workers of Xenofresh and Ginardine. But as the rent and power costs kept rising, they were forced to raise their prices just to survive. Some customers assumed they were gouging and grew hostile. In that climate of resentment and suspicion, Thomas died, and Catherine couldn't accept the official explanation. Neon Security claimed Thomas had suffered a heart attack and fallen from the upper platform, but Thomas, 70 or not, had recently received a clean bill of health from Dr. Manning.
The captain offered to look into the situation, much to Catherine's relief. She asked him to speak with Tevin Anastas, whose security listed as the sole witness. The captain departed for the Emporium immediately.
Tevin wasn't eager to speak. He insisted he'd already told security everything he saw and asked the captain to leave. But they pressed him, and eventually Tevin cracked. Thomas had been murdered. Tevin had seen the whole thing. A man named Russell or Rusty had attempted to rob Thomas. When Thomas refused to hand over any money, the two got into a scuffle.
Rusty shoved him, and he went over the platform's edge.
That was the version Tevin gave to security, too, until a guard put a gun to his head and told him to keep quiet. It wasn't the man who had committed the crime, but someone clearly protecting the killer. Tevin figured Rusty had a friend in the force. When asked why he didn't get involved, Tevin told the captain that he wasn't going to risk his life for a man he hardly knew. He had reported the event and ended up with his life being threatened regardless. He told the captain he'd never seen the murderer in his shop, but knew that he lived near Madame Sauvage's place. Tevin asked the captain not to mention his name if they confronted the murderer or security, and ushered them out of his shop. The captain crossed the core, made their way to Madame Sauvage's, and proceeded to check the nearby sleep crates. That's when Rusty Becker emerged from the shadows. asking for a few credits. The captain confronted him about Thomas's death. Rusty panicked. His security contact had promised no one would find out. Pressed for answers, Rusty broke down and told the story. He had needed Aurora, but was short on credits when he saw Thomas, the guy who was ripping people off with outrageous prices at his store. He demanded money, and when Thomas refused, there was a scuffle. What followed was an accident. He never intended to kill Thomas. When the captain asked for the name of his friend in security, he refused to give it up. This left the captain completely unable to pursue the case in the legal system. Not only was Neon Security corrupt, there was a chance that, in reporting it, they would be speaking with the very man who had threatened Tevin. They would be risking their life, Tevin's life, and maybe even Catherine's life, while Rusty could get off scot-free. Also, what happened if they let Rusty go and he killed someone else? That death would be on them for not dealing with him. With the role of judge, jury, and potentially even executioner on their shoulders, the captain chose exile as the man's punishment. It came down to a question of intent, and the captain believed that the killing had been accidental. Their hope was that the universal prohibition of Aurora elsewhere in the settled systems would be the exact thing to help him get clean and maybe even feel some proper grief for what he had done. After telling Rusty to leave Neon and never return, the captain headed back to the quick shop and Catherine Lusian. They told her her husband had been murdered, that it had been Rusty, and that a corrupt cop had attempted to cover it up. As for Rusty's fate, the captain told her that he had been dealt with. She offered to pay the captain for their work, but knowing how difficult her situation was, they refused. She thanked the captain and went back to mourning her lost husband. Emotionally drained and in need of a break, the captain decided to grab a tea. No stimulants, not even coffee on the day they kicked Aurora. So they made their way to tranquility in the lobby of Ryujin Tower. Upon arrival, the captain marveled at how sharply it contrasted with the world outside in Akuchi Market. The floors here were clean and dry, artwork hung from the ceiling, and every staff member was well-groomed and impeccably dressed. Unfamiliar with the tower's layout, but having heard that a Tranquility Cafe was located somewhere within, the captain stopped to speak with the tower's secretary, Ms. Jupiter Ellicott. The daughter of two Ryujin employees, Thomas and Nancy Ellicott, Jupiter's employment was undoubtedly a product of nepotism. But in her case, that didn't mean she was unqualified. She conducted herself with professionalism that never veered into stiffness, and her friendly demeanor never felt forced. She explained the layout of the lobby, noting the two prominent subsidiaries with storefronts there, Tranquility and Arboron, as well as Ryujin's own product showroom. She also pointed out the employment application terminal across the hall. The captain thanked her and decided to take a look around. They headed first to Tranquility, where they met Delilah Stewart, the tea server. Delilah had grown up in a small farming colony that had produced some of the very tea sold at Tranquility. As a child, she dreamed of one day moving to Neon, seduced by the city's glamorous mystique. But now, having lived and worked here for some time, she'd shed those illusions. Neon was no paradise. While she wasn't planning to return to farming life, she also had no intention of staying in Neon forever, and was glad there wasn't anywhere else in the settled systems quite like it. After finishing their tea and thanking Delilah for the conversation, the captain wandered over to Arboron, Ryujin's weapon manufacturing subsidiary. There they met Ken Bright, the Arboron sales rep and a veteran of the Freestar Navy. He welcomed them warmly and introduced them to Arboron's Nova series, which used electrically charged ammunition to stun rather than kill human targets. Though proud of his employer, Ken, like Delilah, also encouraged the captain to check out Ryujin's Neuroamp showroom across the hall. There, among sleek display cases, stood Aito Suzuki, the store's representative. He explained Ryujin's neuroamps, sleek pieces of wearable technology that enhance the brain's cognitive and social functions. Models were available for intimidation, diplomacy, and instigation, each with 3 tiers of potency and price. Though initially skeptical, the captain listened as Aito shared his story. Before acquiring a neuroamp, he cycled through a series of low-level jobs at Ryujin, failing to find success in any. His last post had been janitorial work, scrubbing the very floors of the tower they now stood in. But after getting a neuroamp, everything changed. He could speak clearly to others. He'd held his current role for 6 months, thriving in a way he never had before. Though they were impressed, the captain would spend some time considering what model to get before moving forward. The captain thanked Aito and departed the storefront. With their curiosity piqued about the rest of Ryujin's operations, the captain stepped into the elevator and made their way to Taiyo Astroneering, Ryujin's in-house starship manufacturer. Stepping off the elevator, the captain was immediately struck by the immaculate design of Taiyo Astroneering's showroom. The walls and floor, a flawless white, left no room for imperfection. Any speck of dust would have been glaringly obvious. The lighting was almost surreal, casting a soft glow that made the entire space seem to shimmer. Here and there stood mock-ups of Taiyo's sleek starship modules, along with fully walkable interior displays. But the space wasn't just a showroom. It hosted an active engineering office, too. Inside the office, the captain spotted someone they never expected to see in person, Dara Ulrecht, a legend in the world of starship design. Eager to meet her, the captain made a beeline for the office. Dara lit up at the praise, clearly someone who appreciated admiration and was happy to chat despite her mounting stress. She explained that she and her colleague Vern Sabakin were racing to meet a deadline, trying to cram in as many new features as possible before finalizing their latest design. She was frustrated, bordering on burned out. The grind was relentless, and she lamented that any innovation she managed to pioneer would be quickly copied by the rival star yards. Believing it was best to let her get back to work, the captain turned to Vern. Whether he was naturally friendly or simply laying on the charm, Vern Sabakin greeted the captain warmly, joking that they were far too interesting a person to be hanging around in a place like this. He warned them that Dara's mood was worse than usual today. Vern admired her talent deeply, but admitted he worried she sometimes hyper-focused on deep technical advancements while losing sight of what drove sales, practical user-facing features. Still, he spoke of her with respect and loyalty. Leaving the engineers to their deadline, the captain stepped back into the showroom where they met Veronica Young, the sales manager. She told the captain that she was so happy she got to sell people the sleek, sexy starships of their dreams. This was the dream of the founders of Tayo, who saw the utilitarian designs of the other star yards and decided to make something to match the energy and excitement of Neon. The captain browsed the available ships, impressed by their styling. Still not in the market for a new starship, the captain headed back to the elevator and set a course for the offices of Drone Robotics and Tranquility's corporate headquarters. Stepping off the elevator, the captain saw the offices of Drone Robotics directly ahead. Not especially familiar with the company's products, they stepped inside and were greeted by Robert Fry. He stumbled slightly over his introduction, quickly apologizing he was still adjusting to his new role. Originally hired as an administrative assistant for Tranquility, Robert had just completed 2 weeks of training when Drone's former office manager, a man with 10 years of experience, unexpectedly walked off the job after a visit to the executive floor. With no one else lined up, Ryujin assigned Robert to fill the vacancy. It was now his first week, and he admitted things were going about as well as one would expect. Despite the prestige of the new position, Robert confided that he'd much rather be at Tranquility. The people were kinder, and the office smelled like a warm cup of tea. Still, he did his best to brief the captain on Drone's product line, which ranged from heavy-duty industrial bots used on starships and in starports, to the small mini-bots that roamed the floor, cleaning or performing basic security tasks. The captain looked around the office, thanked Robert, and stepped back into the hall. Just outside, the captain encountered Lindell Green, a former batball pro for Aquila City's team, now working for Starfreight Logistics. His job? Acquiring and certifying robots. He asked the captain if Drone were the best robots as the company claimed. The captain answered they preferred the products of Luna Robotics. After all, the only drone bots they'd seen were the mini-bots, whereas they had first-hand experience with Vasco, a fully fledged Luna Robotics Model A. Lindell approved of the choice and said goodbye, deep in thought about his company's next purchase. The captain next headed across the hall to the corporate offices of Tranquility, where they met Christine Quince, the office manager. Like Delilah Stewart, Christine's counterpart downstairs, she liked working for Tranquility. Unlike her counterpart downstairs, Christine enjoyed living in Neon. Having grown up in Aquila City, Christine had dreamed of living near the ocean, and Neon being completely surrounded by it made it the perfect place for her. Despite the paucity of sunny days, she loved the city and how it flourished against the odds. When it came to the teas that Tranquility served, Christine loved the company's Sunray tea and recommended that if the captain was interested in learning how the tea was made, that they speak with the blend master, Nancy Ellicott. Rounding the corner, the captain found Nancy Ellicott sitting at her desk. Nancy had been with Tranquility for approximately 8 years, long enough to make her one of the employees before Ryujin took over. When it came to that takeover, she heartily approved, especially as it led her to meet her husband, Thomas. As blend master, Nancy was responsible for maintaining the quality of every tea blend the company produced, as well as inventing new ones. She was happy to share her knowledge, recommending teas for relaxation, focus, and recovery. When the captain remarked that her name sounded familiar, Nancy smiled and explained. Her daughter Jupiter worked at the front desk, while her husband handled administrative work for Ryujin. Thanking her for the insight, the captain exited the office and returned to the lobby. Before leaving Ryujin Tower, they stopped once more at the Tranquility shop, where they picked up a cup of sleepy time tea as recommended by Nancy Ellicott. Tea in hand, the captain headed back to the Volai Hotel, a little calmer and ready for some much-needed rest. The next morning, the captain awoke feeling fully rested for the first time in days. The fog and cravings brought on by Aurora were gone, and they felt like themselves again. Relieved, they began packing their things when they realized there was still one part of Neon left unexplored, the trade tower. Though they had visited Xenofresh's corporate offices while working undercover as Riley Chernyshevsky, there had been several other companies listed in the tower's directory. It felt wrong to leave without seeing what else was there. After stopping by Terra Brew for a coffee, the captain made their way to the trade tower. Deciding to explore from the top down, they set their sights on the uppermost of the companies, Slayton Aerospace. This first stop proved underwhelming. The offices were sleek and well-appointed, but largely off-limits to the public.
The receptionist Riley was polite but had nothing meaningful to share, other than noting that Slayton was only taking meetings with preferred clients at the moment. Unbothered, the captain thanked her and headed for the next destination, the corporate offices of Strat Eklund. Upon entering the lobby, the captain was greeted by Oscar Trinidad, the receptionist. Unlike Riley upstairs, Oscar was a bit more welcoming, though only slightly. He confirmed the offices were open to the public, but requested the captain keep interruptions to a minimum. They found this more than reasonable and proceeded inward. The first person they encountered was none other than Issa Eklund. The captain already knew her husband, Walter Stroud, chief financier of Constellation, and now found themselves face to face with the other half of the legendary pair. Before they married, both Issa and Walter had run successful consumer goods companies. After they were wed, they merged their businesses and leveraged their combined wealth to break into the starship industry, quickly becoming one of the most well-known manufacturers in the settled systems. These days, Issa handled day-to-day operations at Strat Eklund, while Walter focused his energy on advancing Constellation's mission. Though the couple lived apart due to the demands of their respective roles, their affection remained strong and they saw each other whenever time allowed. When the captain asked Issa what she thought Neon's biggest problem was, she didn't hesitate. A lack of moral authority. From Aurora addicts in the underbelly to feuding megacorporations at the top, Neon lacked a guiding conscience, something that allowed selfishness and chaos to fester at every level. Struck by the depth and clarity of her insight, the captain thanked her and made their way back to the elevator with a plan to visit Keltcorp. Unfortunately, the captain fumbled the elevator controls and ended up punching the button for core kinetics. Deciding to just go with it, they stepped out into the company's sleek office, where they met Matthias Durant, the very enthusiastic company salesman. Matthias launched into a hard sell, weaving imaginary combat scenarios where the captain used core kinetics firearms to blast through walls and pirates alike, claiming their weapons were a step above the best in the settled systems. After browsing the weaponry, the captain wandered the rest of the office, checking out the weapons workbench, stopping briefly at the full-scale gun range, and even peeking into the corporate suite. With their curiosity satisfied, the captain returned to the elevator and headed to the next floor up, the corporate headquarters of Ginardine Industries. As the elevator doors opened, the captain was greeted, if one could call it a greeting, by G. Nishara at the front desk. G's mood was unmistakably dour. He wasted no time. If the captain was there to apply for a job, Ginardine wasn't hiring. If they wanted a tour, that had been shut down. He explained bluntly that the company was struggling. Aside from the conduction grid, Ginardine hadn't produced any significant innovations. Their power systems and generator units brought in some revenue, but most of it was vanishing into the black hole that was the R&D department. The captain remembered from their earlier visit to Ginardine's plant that the department head was Brayson Bayou, brother of Benjamin Bayou. G confirmed it. He lamented that there was little that could be done. Brayson's position was a result of nepotism, and removing him would have required the approval of the very man who had placed him there. Though G appeared to be a receptionist seated behind the front desk in the foyer, he was actually third in the company's chain of command. Only Ayumi Kamiko, the COO, and Kato Harada, the absentee CEO, outranked him. And yet, even with his seniority, G had no authority to dismiss Brayson. His only hope was to appeal to Benjamin Bayou directly. He told the captain he had already drafted a report outlining Brayson's failures and recommending his removal. But before sending it, he asked the captain for their opinion. Should he send it or bury it? Knowing the true extent of Benjamin Bayou's power and the dangers faced by those who crossed him, the captain advised caution. While they might have been willing to confront Bayou themselves, they couldn't in good conscience push G towards a move that might cost him his life. Better to bury the report than risk becoming another disappearance. G thanked the captain for their insight and returned to his work. The captain took a brief tour of the office and stepped back into the elevator, this time finally to ascend to Keltcorp. At Keltcorp, the captain met Clover McKenna, though she was quick to correct that she preferred to be called Chloe. Right from the start, Chloe assumed that the captain was yet another representative of Saburo Okaribo. Once the captain clarified that that wasn't the case, she apologized for her abruptness. When asked about the name Clover, she explained in her Irish brogue that it had been her father's idea, meant to preserve the legacy of their people. She, however, found the name a bit ridiculous and preferred to leave it behind. As for Saburo, Chloe explained that he owned a mining shop in Akuchi Market called the Mining League, where he bought and sold ore and mining equipment, an odd niche for a world without a speck of dry land. The captain realized they'd walked past the storefront a time or two over the past few days, dismissing the sign as a joke. It was only now that they realized it was a real shop. Chloe explained that the problem with Saburo was financial. He had purchased equipment from Keltcorp on credit, and the debt had come due. Rather than face it himself, he kept sending proxies. Hence her mistaken assumption about the captain, and yet despite the debt, Chloe confessed she didn't want to press him. She was trying to help. In her words, Saburo was one of the nicest people you'll ever meet, and too proud to ask for assistance. She'd been thinking about how the burden must be affecting him. It had been keeping her up at night. She even admitted to keeping a diary to help process the stress. With how deeply affected she seemed, the captain suspected that Chloe's concern might have been more than professional. When they broached the topic, though, she quickly shut the conversation down. Still, the captain agreed to help. If Saburo wouldn't accept help on his own, maybe seeing Chloe's thoughts in her own words would give him the push he needed. And so, after stopping by the Kelt Corp boardroom, the captain slipped into the bullpen to search for the diary. Sure enough, the slate confirmed their hunch. Chloe had feelings for Saburo and had been trying to rationalize her desire to help him as something purely professional. The captain pocketed the slate, hopeful that it would be enough to get Saburo to finally accept her support and return to the elevator. The captain made their way through Bayou Plaza to Akuchi Market and stepped into the mining league. Even here inside Saburo Okaribo's own store, there were people scoffing at the idea of a mining supply shop on Volai Alpha. The captain crossed the room and introduced themselves. Saburo was eager to talk shop. He quickly clarified that he wasn't trying to support mining operations on Volai Alpha, but on the outskirts of the settled system. Frontier worlds, where the demand for mining tools and gear remained high. Still, things weren't going well. The business was not bringing in enough revenue to cover his rent in the overpriced Akuchi market. But Saburo wasn't looking for charity, at least not to settle his debt with Kelt Corp. Instead, he had a plan to strengthen his store and those around him. His idea was simple: cooperation. Participating shops would cross-promote one another and share customers through mutual recommendation and coordinated sales. A network of cooperation, not competition. The captain, recognizing the potential of Saburo's proposal, chose to prioritize his plan before discussing Chloe's loan forgiveness offer. Taking a stack of flyers, the captain set out across the city to garner support. First up, Newell's Goods. James was in high spirits and thankful for the captain's help in his feud with Dietrich. He took a flyer without hesitation, noting that the proposal sounded promising. At Legrand's Liquors, however, Yannick was much less enthusiastic. He was far more interested in the captain working a shift at Xenofresh. When it came to the flyer, he said he would consider it in his own time. Moving west past the Ryujin apartments, the captain returned to Neon Tactical. There, Frank was in a noticeably better mood, and the graffiti scarring sticks had been cleaned up. He also told them that, though he didn't have any friends, he considered the captain to be one of them, and told them that they were welcome anytime. Even so, Frank refused the flyer outright. He didn't need any handouts. At the Trade Authority, Coleman Lang echoed the sentiment. He declined the flyer and dismissed Saburo's idea entirely. Back in Bayou Plaza, the captain visited Seacart's Outfitters, where Dietrich was pleased to see them again. He noted that the Merchants Alliance meetings were going well and was happy to accept Saburo's flyer, admitting that business could always be better. The captain moved on to the Emporium, where Tevin Anastas was thankful for their assistance with Headlock. He claimed that their work with the thug had seemingly caused the Seoka Syndicate to stop harassing shops across the board. When it came to Saburo's proposal, however, he was lukewarm, but he accepted the flyer for consideration. Continuing their clockwise loop of the core, the captain dropped by Enhance, where Paige Overton also agreed to take a flyer, though she made no promises. As for the Volai Hotel, the captain received a more positive reception. Minerva Clement thanked them for the flyer and promised to give the idea some serious thought. Back at Reliant Medical, Dr. Manning thanked the captain for having brought him supplies and noted that he and Dr. Edding had set up a supply network to keep him going. He endorsed Saburo's idea on the condition he had enough supplies to support it. With 4 confirmed supporters, 3 maybes, and 2 outright rejections, the captain returned to the mining league. Saburo was moved by the support his fellow merchants had shown. Then the captain dropped even better news. Kelt Corp was willing to forgive his debt. At first, Saburo hesitated to accept the offer of debt forgiveness. He firmly believed in the responsibility to repay one's loans, no matter the difficulty. But when the captain presented Chloe McKenna's diary, her heartfelt words laid bare, his resolve softened. Saburo was visibly moved. He admitted he had feelings for Chloe too, but had been doing his best to keep their relationship professional. Now that he knew her feelings mirrored his own, he was willing to accept her offer. Not as charity, but as a gesture between partners. More than that, he was excited by the prospect of working closely with her in the future. With his response in hand, the captain returned to the trade tower. Chloe was overjoyed to hear that Saburo had accepted her help. She thanked the captain sincerely, and they headed for the elevator. At last, feeling they'd done all they could in Neon for now, the captain returned to the Volai Hotel to pack. In just 5.5 days, they toured the entire city, met every present public notable figure, purchased 2 pieces of real estate, learned how to cook Aurora, became addicted, cured the addiction, battled gangsters, joined a gang, ended a gang war, covered up a crime, saved a DJ's work and an engagement, smuggled life-saving medicine, strengthened the business community, and defended merchants against the predatory elements of the city. As they left, the captain descended to the lobby to check out, only to recall an offhand remark made by Minerva Clement. She had once hinted at having a secret, one powerful enough to keep Benjamin Bayou in check, and she said she might reveal it after the captain stayed at her hotel for a few nights. Hoping 5 nights was enough, the captain approached her. This time, Minerva delivered. She told the captain that she had done her research and believed they could be trusted. Then she laid it bare. She possessed incontrovertible evidence that Benjamin Bayou was the true head of the Sioka Syndicate. The implications were staggering. Of course, Minerva had safeguarded herself. If anything were to happen to her, a dead man switch would ensure that the evidence was released through a trusted contact. Unbidden, a stream of images came to mind. Nishar being arrested by Neon Security, Felix Sadler being attacked by the Syndicate, Administrator Bayou and Legrand's Liquors locking down a deal on Blend. He'd been in on every step of the journey. The captain left with a clearer picture of the man who ruled Neon both publicly and from the shadows. Bayou wasn't just the administrator. He held Freestar credentials, controlled Neon Security, owned Xenofresh, and commanded the Syndicate. Each of these bodies was a limb of the same beast. With them, he wielded near absolute control over the city. Ready to escape this spider's web, the captain gathered their things, departed for the spaceport, and left Neon behind. As the city shrank into a glowing speck in the endless ocean of Volae Alpha, they set a new course and jumped into the adventure awaiting them next. Alright, that covers the narrative, but I have some notes before we close things out. Before we get started, I want to quickly state that this section contains very minor spoilers for some faction missions and the main story. In past videos covering Cydonia and New Atlantis, I avoided including this kind of content, but with Neon, a much larger portion of the city would be off limits if I didn't at least acknowledge the affected NPCs here. We'll start with Nicholas Slayton, the head of Slayton Aerospace. You may have noticed that the Slayton Aerospace section was quite sparse in detail. That's because it and its owner feature heavily in the main mission, All That Money Can Buy. We also get to meet a Slayton Aerospace employee named Musgrove, see an interaction between Walter Stroud and his wife Issa Eklund, and get special interactions with James Newell and Boone Morgan. Next, Estelle Vincent hangs around Madame Sauvage's place during the Crimson Fleet mission Absolute Power. It is during this mission that we can also meet Ginardine's COO, Ayumi Komiko, and learn that she's in a relationship with Micah from Euphorica. We also meet Ginardine head of R&D Brayson Bayou, and have a special interaction with his brother, Administrator Benjamin Bayou. You also have 1 or 2 additional interactions with Benjamin Bayou in the Ryujin mission Guilty Parties, depending on your choices. Next, during the Freestar Rangers mission Shadows and Neon, we get a few special interactions with Ranger Price, meet a maintenance worker named Billy Clayton, a syndicate loan shark named Emmett Goldman, and a thief named Grace Early. Next, when becoming part of Ryujin, you meet a lot of characters that can only be found in Ryujin's restricted floors. Specifically, Alexis Price is the head of Ryujin's legal department. She works to iron out legal issues created by their corporate operatives. She's the mother of Neon's Freestar Ranger, Jalen Price. She's immensely disappointed in her son's choice of career, feeling that he could have made a great lawyer. Next, there's April Sweeney, a Ryujin operative, the people who carry out Ryujin's acts of corporate espionage across the settled systems with varying degrees of legality. April generally can be found hounding technicians for more information, a habit that has been noticed by her boss Imogen Salzo as excessive. Next, Camden Cho is the head of Ryujin's logistics department. He works to ensure that every department of the company has what it needs to accomplish its goals, from more pins to armor-penetrating rounds. Next, Dalton Fines is the head of Ryujin's security department, constantly on the lookout for attacks from the outside and subversion from within. Next, DeMarcus Sterling is Ryujin's chief engineer with a specialization in cybernetics. He is heavily involved in neuroamp design. Next, Genevieve Monahan is Ryujin's head of marketing and public relations, spinning the actions of the corporation's operatives and generally working to improve the perception of Ryujin in the eyes of the public. Next, Imogen Salzo is a senior operations specialist with Ryujin. She serves as your handler should you work as an operative for Ryujin. Next, Lane Garza is Ryujin's receptionist on the operations floor of Ryujin Tower. Next, Lyndon Calderi is Ryujin's chief financial officer, watching over the books, making financial forecasts, and considering new acquisitions. Next, Maeve Cellini is the assistant to Ryujin's COO, Ularu Chin, and Ryujin's CEO, Masako Amada. Next, Rafiq Hamza is a technician with Ryujin. These guys are the people who do the mission prep to ensure that operatives have the information they need to succeed. In his off time, Rafiq performs charity work in Ebbside and the Underbelly. This is partially done to help the people, and partially done to remind him how hard life can be, so that he doesn't get untethered from reality. He has a side mission for the captain called Balancing the Books that brings them back to Huang Li, the professional panhandler in the Underbelly. It's during this mission that we learn that Huang Li keeps spreadsheets of collections data that she has written up using condiments as ink. Next, Thomas Ellicott, the father of Jupiter Ellicott and husband of Nancy Ellicott, effectively works the same job as his daughter, but for the executive floor. Next, Tomo Higashi is a former Ryujin assistant who as of 2330 has lost his job with the company. He can be found fairly disgruntled in Terabrew Coffee during the first Ryujin mission, Back to the Grind. Next, Vina Kalra is the head of Ryujin's R&D department. Next, Yuko Serrano is a senior operations specialist like Imogen Salzo. Next, we meet a hacker named Nix in Madame Savage's place during the Ryujin mission background checks, and visit Nix's apartment during this mission as well. Next, Kumio is a member of the Seoka Syndicate, found in their massive hideout during the Ryujin mission Guilty Parties. During this mission, we also learn that Francesca Moore is something of an honorary member of the Syndicate. Next, Arthur Cruz, though not a resident of Neon as far as I know, can be found in the Astral Lounge during the Ryujin mission Sowing Discord. He's here for a meeting with Infinity Ltd. Lastly, Zola Adisa, like Arthur Cruz, can also be found in the Astral Lounge during the same Ryujin mission and is also there for a meeting with Infinity Ltd. In less specific terms, we also learn that Ryujin has something like 100 unnamed security personnel, so that should give you an idea of the true size of Ryujin Tower and the company overall. With those NPCs covered, let's get into the notes. First, as I said in the disclaimer, most of the missions can be pursued in any order that the player so chooses, but there are some that have to be completed in a specific order. The first of these are the blend missions: Loose Ends, Fishy Business, and Supply Line. Note that I didn't show Supply Line, as it's simply a mission to work the Xenofresh production line as one does in Fishy Business, and can be completed endlessly. That said, working Supply Line twice will result in the player learning how to make Aurora at any chemistry station, though Chasm Bass oil is required in every case and not easy to come by, but I digress. The Ebbside Striker missions also have to be completed in order: the Audition, Power Play, and finally the Showdown. The mission Dirty Laundry can also only be completed after the conclusion of the Ebbside Striker missions. As for alternate endings, alphabetically, in About Face you can convince Erica to leave Miguel or fail to convince her to return to him, which strangely ends up with her going to meet him. I don't know why this second alternate ending exists. In the Audition, you can kill every disciple in the room rather than sneak in. Instead of being impressed by your stealth, Briggs is impressed by your killing power. In Bare Metal, you can kill Warlord rather than threaten him. Either way, you get his credits for Frank to clean sticks. In Hard Luck, you don't have to share Chloe's diary with Saburo. You can persuade him to take the loan forgiveness, but it doesn't appear that the relationship moves past being all business. In Loose Ends, you can kill Felix Sadler rather than convince him to leave Neon. In Mob Mentality, you can kill Headlock rather than reason with him, which yields no real alternate ending to the conversation with Tevin and Nastas. In Relief Run, you can bring just one load of medicine, which results in Dr. Manning still being happy with you, but slightly less so. In Saburo's solution, you actually only have 5 flyers from Saburo, while I detailed the reactions of every merchant to receiving one. Any 5 will work, but I prefer to bring the flyers to the 5 most interested: James Newell, Dietrich Sieghart, Tevin and Nastas, Minerva Clement, and Dr. Manning. In the Showdown, you can accept Holt Henley's offer and gun down the Ebbside Strikers. This ends the mission immediately after killing the last striker while yielding the same result, and a similar lack of criminal charges. In Superfan, you can persuade Stratos to just hand the slate over without the need for a dose of Aurora. Alternatively, you can attempt to pickpocket the slate, which is difficult in the crowded establishment, or kill him and loot it from his corpse, which results in a murder charge. Lastly, in Unjustified, you can lie to Catherine and tell her that Thomas's death was in fact an accident. Alternatively, you can kill Rusty Becker rather than exiling the murdering Aurora addict from Neon. If this is done, Catherine is, if anything, more appreciative that her husband's killer is out of the picture. Second, as I said in the introduction, Neon lies on Voli Alpha. Voli Alpha is the second planet from the star Voli. In most star systems, worlds are either given unique names or are designated by their star's name and orbital position. In the Voli system, however, planets and moons are given compound names using the star's name, Voli, and a Greek letter. One might assume that this ordering is based on a hierarchy of importance, as Voli Alpha is the only world in the system with a breathable atmosphere, and is home to the system's largest settlement, Neon. However, Voli Delta is an asteroid, while Voli Epsilon is the only other planet in the system to have life growing on it. With this, any specific naming rationale breaks down. That said, the inner system, worlds 1 through 3, and their moons tend to use letters found early in the Greek alphabet, while the outer system worlds are within the latter half of the Greek alphabet. Third, Neon's platform resembles an offshore oil rig to a large extent. While some offshore oil platforms are directly anchored to the sea floor, most modern platforms float. Though we don't know the depth of Voli Alpha's planet-wide ocean, Neon does appear to have the architecture to let it float rather than be mounted to the sea floor. Fourth, I would love to know how Neon was originally constructed. How did things go from planet-wide ocean to floating platform that is presumably stationary?
How do they construct the spars that form the foundation of the platform? In space, or did they build them on the surface of the ocean? This is not a critique, I legitimately want to know. Fifth, Valentina Gurov has different responses for each option in the hiring questionnaire when the captain applies to work at Xenofresh. In education, she gives a mildly mocking response to high school graduates, regards both those with a bachelor's degree and those with a master's degree as degree holders, and calls anyone with a doctorate either a liar or highly overqualified, while she gives basic approval to those with a certificate from Argos. As for a question of what the captain brings to the role, she mocks all responses, but most of all the "I have no weaknesses" and "my strength is my strength, check out my biceps" responses. Sixth, the Aurora industry doesn't make much sense to me. It is said to be the chief product of Xenofresh, with the other products being seafood and trawl, which is also technically seafood, but reminds me more of Little Lisa's slurry than an actual food product. Aurora is supposedly the product that makes Neon possible, yet the value of the doses is so low. In fact, if a lab tech is working efficiently, they can make more credits per dose than the product sells for. It's hard to see how this drug, which has only one overtly legal point of sale, a fairly small club in one city on one planet, can support the corporation that produces it. I think that I just have to assume that the economy you experience is gamified and not representative of the real situation. Seventh, one of my complaints when it comes to Starfield is that we don't see a lot of in-universe culture. This is true for post-apocalyptic Fallout as well, but Starfield isn't a post-apocalyptic setting. Technically it is, but in a very different way. There was a much more broad continuity of civilization, and humanity is now spread across 1,000 worlds. Despite the sci-fi setting, Starfield is far closer to the Elder Scrolls in terms of what we should be expecting to see in this regard. I've been frustrated that most of the books in game are tiny excerpts of real-world classics, rather than longer excerpts on the history and culture of the Starfield universe. In the Elder Scrolls games, we get histories, plays, myths, and legends in the books. It should be the same in Starfield. There should be books detailing the exodus from Earth, the founding of new settlements across the galaxy, the emergence of the threat of terramorphs, a novelization of a battle on Nira, the story of life in Neon during the Colony War. For the most part, the only version of this that we get is movie posters for films we can't see in-game. In Neon, we finally get information on a piece of in-universe culture. When speaking to Isna Sundara Araman, the underemployed art history graduate working at Sleep Crate, we learn of a work known as Miguel Rafael's Belamos, a charcoal drawing depicting the settlement of Polvo, made with the remains of the first fire made by human hands on the world. While I'd love to see it, I appreciate the work at least being mentioned, as well as having an interesting story attached to it. In this case, it's supposed to have been destroyed in a fire, but it's rumored that the son of the artist sold it to a magnate living in the United Colonies. I hope that we see more things like this as Bethesda releases additional content for Starfield. Eighth, there are a couple of strange disappearances that I spoke about in the narrative, but I wanted to put them together here. First off, the office manager at Drone Robotics, who was on the job for 10 years, went up to the executive floor and never returned. His underlings were told he quit. This seems possible, but is odd nonetheless. Along with this, the predecessor to Paige Overton disappeared when Paige needed a job. She explains that she came to Neon and met Valentina Gurov, the manager of Xenofresh's processing plant, at the Astral Lounge. She told Valentina, who would go on to become her girlfriend, that she needed a job. Suddenly, a spot in Enhance opens up, and no one knows what happened to the previous manager. This may be completely innocuous, but given that Valentina works for Xenofresh, and Xenofresh is owned by Benjamin Bayou, I wouldn't put it past Administrator Bayou to make someone disappear to keep an effective underling happy. Whether this was done violently, with threats, or via corporate coercion with Enhance, I don't know. Ninth, though Drone Robotics is said to primarily produce large industrial robots for use on ships and in shipyards, I haven't seen one in game. It could well be that some of these machines just aren't branded with Drone's logo. But either way, all we see in game of the machines they're said to produce are the minibots. 10th, I've spoken about this in the past, but I wish that Bethesda had retained the Radiant AI system in Starfield. For the uninitiated, this is the NPC scheduling system Bethesda first used in Oblivion in 2006. It makes it so that NPCs have lives outside their role as shopkeeper. Characters do their job, go to church, go to the inn, visit friends, sleep in their homes at night. Bethesda chose to leave this out of Starfield as it can lead to player frustration when a business isn't open at night. I see two ways they could have handled this without completely scrapping the system. A, add second shift workers. They don't even need to be named. For example, Minerva Clement at the Volai Hotel could go out or go to her own room, while a hotel night manager runs things for the other 17.5 hours of Neon's 35-hour day. B, restore the ability to wait anywhere. One of the features removed since Fallout 4, I believe, that has frustrated me is the ability to wait anywhere. You have to sit down to wait, as though sitting on a hard metal bench or a cheap plastic chair for 12 hours is more realistic than standing around for 12 hours or just sitting on the floor for that time. Regardless, that wasn't really the point of this note. The point is that along with removing the Radiant AI system, Bethesda also removed housing for most NPCs, and some of the housing that we do have is incomplete. It's possible to reach Administrator Bayou's penthouse by pickpocketing his key and riding the elevator outside the Astral lounge to the top. While the place generally looks great, there's no bathtub or shower. This means that the richest man, in Neon at the very least, has to use some sort of public bathroom to wash himself. I know it's a minor oversight, but it feels like a symptom of an overall degradation in the realism of NPCs. 11th, speaking of Minerva Clement, while in the narrative I had her tell the captain about the blackmail material after 5 nights, in practice it took staying at the Volai Hotel for 11 nights. 12th, in making this video, I believe I discovered that the length of a hotel stay is in universal hours. By this, I mean that if you rent a hotel room for a day, you get the room for 24 hours universal. And if you rent for a week, you get 168 hours universal. Because Volai Alpha spins more slowly on its axis, 24 hours on Volai Alpha are equivalent to 35 hours universal. Thus, renting a hotel for a week only gives you 4.8 days locally. Given the situation, if you were planning on staying in Neon for a week, it would make more sense fiscally to rent by the day, and check back in each night, assuming you didn't have too much luggage to easily traverse the city, of course. 13th, there are 2 Starborn dialogue options in this content. When it comes to the Ebbside Strikers mission line, there's one in the Audition that effectively bypasses some dialogue, but leaves the rest of the content as is. There's also one in the Blend mission line, in which the player can subtly mock Yannick for thinking he's getting one over on Benjamin Bayou and loose ends. Once again, this has no overall effect on the content. 14th, if you've completed the mission Space Frog from Outer Space in Cydonia, some of Renee Shelby's posters can be found around the platform. Lastly, there are some strange things that can be found in the corporate offices of the Trade Tower. Specifically, most offices have at least one terminal with the exact same messages from Human Resources. And most offices have the same exact woman working as an executive. Along with this, there are some pieces of ore found in these offices that are free to take as they are unowned. You can even find 4 pieces of ore in Saburo Okadibo's mining league with the same status, an odd choice for a man on the verge of bankruptcy. Anyway, that's enough notes. Before closing this out completely, I have some final remarks on this content. Let me just say that aside from my issues with the removal of Radiant AI and some issues with environmental layout, of the cities I've covered, Neon feels like the best representation of what it is said to be in the lore. My main issue with the locations in Starfield is that the environments that have been created don't match the lore built for those locations. While this is less of an issue in Cydonia, New Atlantis feels like we're experiencing one tiny fraction of the city as it should be. New Atlantis is supposed to be the biggest, most populous, and most important city in all of human civilization. Yet it's quite small and surrounded by practically virgin forests. In the case of Neon, the city feels like it should probably be about 2 to 4 times larger and have more pads for the spaceport, but it feels so much closer to what it should be as constructed in the lore. On one hand, it's an amazing place with high-end technology, incredible wealth, and serves as the pleasure city for the settled systems. On the other hand, it has areas with extreme deprivation, has a wildly corrupt government, corporate espionage, horrible crime, and a vast drug problem. It manages to blend these elements together into an incredible and unique city floating gently in an endless ocean. Alright, I think that'll do it for this video. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. I stream every Friday evening on YouTube, come check it out if you're interested. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron of the Patreon. I want to thank my channel members and patrons Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Dr. Orion, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, Electric Head, Hero Cunning, Laced Cake, Osborne and Bread 73, NB Mole Miner, Clay, Prince Julius, Doc Vanguard Voyager, and those who have made super chats for their support. I also want to specifically thank Dark Malcontent for helping with this video's script. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.